Hi guys, and welcome to Gentle History for Deep Sleep. Tonight we step into one of the most famous winters in American history, a season of smoke, snow, hunger, and quiet endurance. Imagine yourself standing on a cold Pennsylvania hillside as daylight fades behind bare trees. The air stings your face, your breath drifts away in pale clouds. Somewhere in the distance, hundreds of axes strike wood with a steady rhythm. Fires flicker through the gathering darkness. Men wrapped in worn blankets move across frozen ground, carrying logs and supplies through mud that seems determined to swallow every boot. If you are expecting a heroic winter adventure filled with warm campfires and inspiring speeches every evening, well, you probably will not survive this reality check. Valley Forge is not a comfortable place. It is a place where even finding dry socks can feel like a remarkable achievement. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to share your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights and allow yourself to drift back to December of 1777. You arrive after weeks of uncertainty. The American Revolution has already been raging for more than 2 years. Battles have been fought. Victories have been celebrated. Defeats have been endured. Yet the future remains far from certain. As you make your way toward Valley Forge, the roads are crowded with soldiers, wagons, horses, and exhausted camp followers. The countryside looks bleak beneath the grey sky. Fields lie dormant, trees stand bare and silent. Winter has settled over Pennsylvania. The Continental Army has chosen this location for its winter encampment. One established historical fact is that approximately 12,000 soldiers entered the Valley Forge camp during the winter of 1777 and 1778. They arrived from different colonies, different backgrounds, and different walks of life. Farmers march beside former craftsmen. Labourers share roads with merchants. Some are experienced veterans. Others are little more than teenagers carrying muskets. You move among them and quickly notice how tired they appear. The recent campaign season has been difficult. British forces have captured Philadelphia, the revolutionary capital. The loss weighs heavily on many minds, yet the army remains intact, and that alone offers a measure of hope. The landscape around Valley Forge seems both practical and intimidating. Rolling hills overlook important roads. Nearby waterways provide natural barriers. Dense forests offer building materials. Military leaders see strategic advantages here. Ordinary soldiers see a cold wilderness waiting to test them. As evening approaches, smoke rises from scattered fires. The smell of burning wood fills the air. You hear distant voices speaking in different accents. Some men come from New England villages, others from Virginia plantations, others from bustling port towns. Despite their differences, they now share the same uncertain future. One curious detail often overlooked is that some soldiers brought pets into camp. Dogs occasionally wandered among the tents and huts, scavenging for scraps and providing companionship during lonely weeks. Such small comforts mattered more than you might imagine. You continue walking through the growing encampment. At first glance, the camp appears chaotic. Wagons creak across muddy paths. Officers issue instructions. Men unload supplies. Teams of soldiers search for suitable locations to build shelters. Everywhere you look, work is underway. The sounds create an unusual winter orchestra. Axes strike wood, horses snort in the cold, voices call through the trees. Firewood cracks, metal tools ring against frozen earth. Yet beneath the activity lies uncertainty. Nobody knows exactly how severe the winter will become. Nobody knows whether supplies will arrive on time. Nobody knows how many hardships still lie ahead. You find yourself standing on a ridge overlooking the camp. From here, the scene stretches across the landscape, Thin columns of smoke rise into the pale sky. Groups of men move like tiny figures between trees. The forest seems endless. The cold feels deeper as darkness approaches. A number of researchers continue to discuss whether some later descriptions of Valley Forge exaggerated certain hardships while understating others. The broad picture of suffering is beyond dispute, but historians still argue whether particular stories became larger through generations of retelling. Like many famous historical events, Valley Forge exists partly as reality and partly as memory. Night settles slowly, the temperature drops. You pull your coat tighter. Many soldiers have no such luxury. Uniform shortages are already evident. Some men wear mismatched clothing gathered from various sources. Jackets differ in colour. Hats differ in shape. Blankets vary greatly in quality. The army looks less like a perfectly organised military force and more like a determined collection of ordinary people trying to survive extraordinary circumstances. And perhaps that is exactly what it is. As darkness deepens, campfires become the dominant feature of the landscape. Orange light dances across faces. Shadows stretch between trees. The smell of smoke settles into everything. Clothing smells of smoke. Hair smells of smoke. Even the cold air seems flavoured by it. You sit beside one fire and listen. The conversations are surprisingly familiar. Men complain about food. They discuss weather. They share stories about home. They wonder what loved ones are doing many miles away. Human nature has not changed very much. One soldier speaks of his family's farm. Another recalls a favourite tavern. A third insists that spring will arrive sooner than everyone expects. Nobody believes him, but they appreciate the optimism. The fire crackles softly. Above, stars emerge through gaps in the clouds. For a moment, the camp almost feels peaceful. Yet tomorrow will bring enormous challenges. Thousands of men still need shelter. Food supplies remain uncertain. Winter is only beginning. You watch sparks rise into the night sky and disappear among the stars. Around you, the future of the American cause rests not on a battlefield, but in a frozen valley where endurance may prove just as important as courage. The wilderness waits, the cold waits, and soon, the real work of surviving Valley Forge will begin. Morning arrives with a pale grey light that seems reluctant to spread across the valley. The cold has sharpened overnight. When you step away from the fire, frozen ground crunches beneath your feet. A thin layer of frost coats fallen branches. Your breath hangs in the still air. Around you, thousands of men are already awake, because there is no luxury of sleeping late in a place like this. The camp remains unfinished. Yesterday you arrived at a wilderness occupied mostly by tents and temporary shelters. Today begins the enormous task of transforming that wilderness into something capable of sustaining an army through winter. You pick up an axe, so do countless others. The forests surrounding Valley Forge quickly become the focus of relentless activity. Trees that have stood quietly for decades now face an army determined to turn them into homes. Home may be an ambitious word. Shelter is probably more accurate. Still, shelter means survival. You follow a work party into the woods. The sounds of chopping echo through the trees. Axes bite into trunks. Wood chips scatter across frozen earth. Men pause occasionally to warm their hands before resuming the labour. Building materials do not arrive neatly packaged. Every log must be cut, carried, measured, and placed by hand. One widely accepted historical detail is that the soldiers constructed thousands of log huts during the Valley Forge encampment. These structures became the backbone of camp life and provided significantly better protection than tents during the harsh winter months. At first, the work appears straightforward. Cut trees, carry logs, build walls. In reality, Every step requires effort. The logs are heavy. The ground is uneven. The weather rarely cooperates. Many soldiers are already tired before the day begins, yet the work continues. You watch groups organize themselves according to practical needs. Some men fell trees, others transport timber, others prepare foundations. Officers move between crews, checking progress and issuing instructions. The camp gradually develops a sense of order. Paths emerge between construction sites. Designs become standardized. The army begins to resemble a temporary town. The smell of fresh pine fills the air. Recently cut wood releases a scent that briefly masks the smoke lingering across the valley. For a moment, you could almost imagine yourself helping build a frontier settlement rather than a military encampment. Almost. Then a cold wind sweeps across the hillside and reminds you where you are. The huts are simple structures. Most consist of log walls fitted together as tightly as possible. Gaps are filled with mud, clay, or whatever material can block drafts. Roofs are covered with boards, branches, and other available materials. Nothing about the process is elegant. Everything about it is necessary. You help drag a particularly stubborn log uphill. Several soldiers push. Several pull. The log seems personally offended by the idea of movement. When it finally shifts, everyone nearly falls backward. A burst of laughter follows. Moments like this matter. Humour survives even when comfort disappears. In fact, difficult circumstances often make ordinary jokes feel more valuable. A particularly odd anecdote from camp life involves soldiers carving small decorative items from leftover wood during spare moments. Some crafted simple utensils, others made pipes, gaming pieces, or tiny keepsakes. Even in a military camp struggling for survival, people still found ways to create small reminders of normal life. As the day progresses, the valley becomes a giant construction site. The sound never truly stops. Axes strike, trees fall, voices call out measurements, wood scrapes against wood. Somewhere nearby, a horse complains loudly about its workload. The horse's opinion appears entirely reasonable. You pause briefly to look across the landscape. Smoke rises from hundreds of fires. Freshly cleared areas spread through the woods. New structures seem to appear almost hourly. The transformation is remarkable. Only days earlier, this was largely open forest. Now it is becoming one of the largest temporary military settlements in North America. Yet not everything proceeds smoothly. Supplies remain limited. Tools wear out. Weather interferes. Some men lack experience with construction. Others have spent years building barns, cabins, and fences back home. Their knowledge becomes extremely valuable. You quickly learn who knows what they're doing. These are the men everyone quietly follows. The older farmer who can judge a straight wall with one glance. The carpenter who understands roof angles. The labourer who somehow lifts twice as much as everyone else. Practical expertise becomes a form of leadership. As afternoon fades, the first completed huts begin to emerge. They are not beautiful. Nobody would mistake them for grand homes. But compared to sleeping beneath canvas tents during a Pennsylvania winter, they look magnificent. You step inside one newly completed structure. The interior is small, very small. Several soldiers will share this space. A fireplace occupies one end. Bunks line the walls. The ceiling feels low, yet the difference between being inside and outside is immediately noticeable. Even before a fire is lit, the hut blocks much of the wind. That alone feels like a luxury. Researchers continue to debate exactly how comfortable these huts actually were once completed. Some descriptions portray them as surprisingly effective winter shelters. Others emphasize lingering drafts, overcrowding, and smoke problems. The truth likely varied from hut to hut depending on construction quality and available materials. As evening approaches, men continue working despite fading light. Nobody wants to stop. Every completed shelter represents protection from future storms. Every unfinished wall represents another cold night. You notice how quickly priorities change in a place like Valley Forge. Back home, people might worry about property disputes, social status, or minor inconveniences. Here, success can mean something as simple as a roof that does not leak. The lowering sun casts long shadows across the camp. Golden light touches stacks of timber. Freshly cut stumps dot the landscape. Smoke drifts lazily through the trees. For a brief moment, the valley looks almost peaceful. Then you remember how much work remains. Thousands of people still need shelter. Winter is growing colder. Supplies remain uncertain. Yet something important has happened today. The army has begun creating permanence, not comfort, not security, but permanence. The wilderness no longer feels entirely wild. Human effort is reshaping it, log by log, wall by wall, fire by fire. As darkness settles over Valley Forge once again, new huts glow with flickering firelight. Their rough outlines stand against the night like small promises. The cold still waits beyond every door. The challenges of hunger, disease, and hardship still lie ahead. But tonight, more soldiers will sleep beneath wooden roofs than they did yesterday. And in a winter where survival depends on countless small victories, that matters more than words can easily express. The new huts provide shelter, but they do not solve the problem that follows you everywhere at Valley Forge. Hunger. You wake before sunrise to the smell of smoke and damp wood. The air inside the hut feels colder than you expected. Someone near the doorway shifts beneath a blanket. Another soldier coughs softly. Outside, the camp is already stirring. The first thought on many minds is not military strategy. It is breakfast, or more precisely, whether breakfast exists at all. You step into the grey morning light and join a growing line of soldiers moving toward areas where food is being distributed. Boots crunch over frozen ground. Breath drifts upward in pale clouds. The mood is subdued. Nobody expects a feast. Most would be pleased with consistency. One firmly established fact is that supply shortages plagued the Continental Army throughout much of the Valley Forge encampment. Food often arrived irregularly, and ration problems became a constant source of frustration. The challenge begins with simple mathematics. Thousands of mouths need feeding every day. Thousands. That means flour, meat, salt, firewood, transportation, storage, and organization. Any weakness in the system quickly becomes noticeable. And the system has many weaknesses. Roads are poor, weather interferes, local supplies are limited, government administration remains inefficient. The young nation is still learning how to support a large army. You eventually receive your meal. It is not particularly memorable. Then again, hunger lowers standards considerably. Many soldiers eat bread when available. Others receive portions of beef or pork. Sometimes meals become repetitive enough that even the most grateful appetite begins to complain. You sit beside a fire and chew slowly. Around you, conversations quickly turn toward food. People discuss food, remember food, dream about food, complain about food, compare food, predict future food. Food dominates social life in ways modern listeners might find difficult to imagine. When scarcity becomes constant, meals occupy enormous mental space. One man describes a pie his mother used to make. Another speaks lovingly about fresh butter. Someone nearby begins describing roasted chicken in such detail that several listeners groan dramatically. The storyteller seems pleased with himself. You suspect this behaviour would be considered psychological warfare today. As the morning progresses, Supply wagons arrive from various directions. Every arrival attracts attention. Heads turn, eyes follow. Hope rises. Will there be flour, meat, salt? Anything. The answer changes from day to day. Sometimes supplies improve, sometimes they disappoint. The uncertainty becomes exhausting. A curious and somewhat amusing historical detail involves soldiers occasionally writing letters filled with elaborate descriptions of meals they hoped to eat once they returned home. Some letters read almost like restaurant menus created entirely from memory and longing. The imagination, it turns out, remains active even during hardship. You walk through camp and notice evidence of hunger everywhere. Men scrape cooking pots carefully. Nothing goes to waste. Crumbs matter, grease matters, bones matter. Anything containing nourishment receives attention. Yet despite the shortages, the situation is not always as simple as starving soldiers surrounded by empty shelves. The real problem often involves distribution. Food may exist somewhere within the supply network, but fail to reach the people who need it efficiently. This distinction frustrates soldiers immensely. Knowing that supplies exist somewhere else provides very little comfort when your stomach is empty. Near midday, you watch officers discussing logistics. The conversation appears tense. Maps unfold. Lists are consulted. Messengers come and go. No battle is being fought nearby. Yet a different kind of struggle continues constantly. The battle against scarcity. The battle against distance. The battle against weather. The battle against bureaucracy. These enemies rarely appear in paintings, but they shape everyday life more than muskets and cannons. You notice that soldiers develop remarkable creativity when faced with shortages. They barter, trade, share, improvise. Someone exchanges tobacco for food. Someone else swaps labour for an extra ration. Small, informal economies emerge throughout the camp. Human beings are astonishingly adaptable, particularly when motivated by hunger. By afternoon, a thin snow begins drifting across the valley. The flakes fall gently at first. They settle on rooftops and tree branches. The camp grows quieter beneath the white covering. Beautiful scenes often conceal difficult realities. The snow looks lovely. The snow also complicates transportation. Every storm threatens future deliveries. Every frozen road creates new obstacles. As you watch the snowfall, you begin to appreciate how interconnected everything is. A farmer miles away harvests grain. A wagon transports it. Road conditions determine travel speed. Officials coordinate movement. Soldiers unload supplies. Cooks prepare meals. Remove one link from the chain, and problems spread everywhere. Several scholars continue to examine exactly how severe particular food shortages became during specific weeks of the encampment. Records sometimes conflict. Personal accounts differ. Researchers still debate whether certain periods were even worse than traditional narratives suggest, or whether later recollections occasionally intensified memories of hardship. What nobody disputes is the central role food played in camp life. Without adequate nourishment, everything else becomes harder. Building huts becomes harder. Marching becomes harder. Remaining healthy becomes harder. Maintaining morale becomes harder. Even staying warm becomes harder. As evening approaches, smoke rises once more from hundreds of chimneys and campfires. The smell of cooking drifts through the cold air. Some meals are modest, others are disappointingly modest. Yet the simple act of gathering around food provides comfort. You sit inside a hut crowded with fellow soldiers. Firelight flickers across rough wooden walls. A kettle hangs above glowing coals. The atmosphere feels warmer than the temperature alone would suggest. Conversation fills the room. Someone tells a story. Someone exaggerates a hunting adventure. Someone claims to know exactly when the war will end. Nobody believes that person either. The tradition of confident predictions unsupported by evidence appears to be timeless. Laughter ripples through the hut. For a few minutes, hunger retreats into the background, not because it disappears, because companionship competes with it. Outside, the winter night settles across Valley Forge. Snow covers the paths. Stars emerge between drifting clouds. The camp glows softly in the darkness. Thousands of people face the same uncertainty. Will supplies improve? Will tomorrow's ration be larger? Will spring arrive quickly? No one knows. Yet morning will come. Work will continue. The search for food will continue. And across this frozen valley, ordinary people will keep finding ways to endure one meal, one day, and one winter at a time. The snow that arrived yesterday remains scattered across the valley this morning. Not enough to create a winter wonderland, just enough to remind you that colder days are still ahead. You emerge from the hut before dawn and immediately feel the air bite at your skin. The sensation is sharp and immediate. Your nose stings. Your fingers ache. The inside of your lungs feels chilled with every breath. The Pennsylvania winter has decided to introduce itself properly. At Valley Forge, cold is not merely a weather condition. It becomes a constant companion. You hear it in the crack of frozen branches. You see it in the frost-lining rooftops. You feel it in your joints when you wake. You notice it every time you leave the warmth of a fire. The army continues functioning despite these conditions, but the effort required is enormous. A well-documented reality of the encampment is that many soldiers arrived without adequate winter clothing. Shortages of coats, blankets, stockings, and shoes created difficulties that followed them throughout the season. You glance down at the footwear of the men around you. Some boots are worn thin. Some have been patched repeatedly. Some barely deserve the name boot at all. Leather cracks under stress. Fabric tears. Materials wear out. The cold never seems to wear out. A soldier nearby stamps his feet repeatedly. Another wraps scraps of cloth around his ankles. A third keeps his hands tucked beneath his arms whenever possible. Everyone develops small strategies. Some work better than others. The camp slowly awakens around you. Smoke rises from chimneys. Doors open. Men shuffle between huts. The valley appears peaceful from a distance. The reality feels considerably less peaceful when your fingers are numb. You begin helping gather firewood. The task sounds simple. Walk into the woods. Collect wood. Return. The cold transforms simplicity into labour. Every trip feels longer. Every load feels heavier. The frozen air drains energy in subtle ways. By mid-morning, you notice how frequently people talk about warmth. Not food this time. Warmth. The topics are surprisingly familiar. The warmest room someone ever slept in. The warmest coat someone ever owned. The warmest fire someone remembers from childhood. People become historians of comfort. Memory turns ordinary moments into treasures. One little known but delightful detail comes from accounts describing soldiers competing for positions nearest the fire inside crowded huts. Negotiations, arguments, and occasional good-natured rivalry developed over who occupied the most desirable sleeping spots. Human civilization may advance. Competition for the warm side of the room remains eternal. The sun rises higher but offers little assistance. Its light brightens the landscape. Its heat contributes almost nothing. You stand atop a small ridge and look across the encampment. The scene is striking. Hundreds of huts, columns of smoke, white patches of snow, dark forests stretching toward the horizon. It almost resembles a temporary city, a city built from determination and necessity. The wind begins to strengthen. That is when the real discomfort arrives. Still air can be tolerated. Wind feels personal. It finds gaps in clothing. It slips beneath coats. It attacks ears, cheeks, and hands with relentless enthusiasm. You pull your collar higher. The wind remains unimpressed. Throughout the day, men continue their duties: wood gathering, construction, guard assignments, supply work. Military responsibilities do not disappear simply because conditions are unpleasant. In fact, winter often creates more work. Roads require maintenance. Paths must remain usable. Firewood consumption increases dramatically. Everything demands effort. You pause near a group repairing damaged equipment. Their hands move carefully despite the cold. Metal tools feel icy to the touch. One man jokes that winter is conducting its own war against the army. Several others agree. The joke spreads quickly. By afternoon, people are referring to General Winter as though he were a real opponent. Honestly, it is difficult to argue with a comparison. Nature appears determined to test everyone present. Researchers continue examining the exact severity of weather conditions experienced during the Valley Forge winter. Some modern analyses suggest that popular imagination occasionally pictures endless blizzards, while actual records reveal a mixture of cold periods, milder intervals, snowfalls, rain, and freezing temperatures. The hardships were real regardless of whether every day looked like a dramatic snowstorm. This observation somehow makes the situation more relatable. Real winters are rarely theatrical. They're repetitive, persistent, uncomfortable. 1,000 small inconveniences accumulating day after day. As evening approaches, the temperature begins dropping once again. Everyone notices. No formal announcement is necessary. Bodies recognize the change instinctively. People move faster. Doors close sooner. Fires receive extra attention. The camp prepares itself for another long night. Inside the hut, the atmosphere gradually improves. A fire glows in the hearth. Wood crackles softly. Shadows dance across the log walls. Several men sit close together, conserving warmth. The contrast between indoors and outdoors feels dramatic. Outside, darkness spreads across the frozen valley. Inside, firelight creates a tiny island of comfort. Not luxury. Comfort. There is a difference. Luxury means abundance. Comfort means temporary relief. Tonight, relief is enough. A fascinating observation from personal accounts is how quickly people adjusted their expectations. Conditions that would have seemed miserable before arriving at Valley Forge eventually felt acceptable. A dry blanket became valuable. A calm night became fortunate. A strong fire became memorable. Perspective changes when survival becomes the primary goal. You listen as conversations drift through the room. Stories from home, speculation about spring, complaints about weather, predictions about future campaigns. Someone insists next winter will be easier. The room responds with skeptical laughter. Nobody appears willing to trust that prediction. The fire continues burning. Outside, wind brushes against the walls. The sound resembles distant waves. For a moment, you simply sit and watch glowing embers shift beneath the logs. The warmth reaches your hands. Your shoulders relax. The cold beyond the walls remains immense. The winter remains long. Challenges still await. Yet tonight, you understand something important. Valley Forge is not endured through dramatic acts of heroism every hour. It is endured through thousands of ordinary decisions. Gather another armful of wood, patch another tear, light another fire, help another soldier, wake up and do it again tomorrow. The cold keeps pressing, the people keep resisting, and so the winter continues. By now, the rough outline of Valley Forge has begun to resemble a functioning community. Not a comfortable community, not a prosperous one, but a community nonetheless. The huts that once existed only as stacks of timber now stand across the hillsides in long rows. Smoke rises steadily from their chimneys. Narrow paths connect one cluster to another. Familiar faces appear each day. People begin recognizing their neighbors. You spend most of your time inside one particular log hut. Calling it spacious would require a heroic commitment to imagination. The structure is small, crowded, and permanently scented with smoke. Yet after weeks of exposure to winter weather, it feels surprisingly welcoming. You duck through the doorway early one morning and immediately notice the difference between outside and inside. The cold remains present, but it no longer dominates every moment. A fire glows at one end of the room. Its warmth spreads unevenly. The men closest to the hearth seem reasonably comfortable. The men farther away continue negotiating with winter. One commonly accepted detail about Valley Forge housing is that enlisted soldiers generally lived in shared huts, often with roughly a dozen men occupying a single structure. Privacy was almost non-existent. You quickly discover that privacy belongs to another world, a world beyond the valley, a world beyond military life. Inside the hut, every activity happens near someone else. Sleeping, eating, talking, repairing clothing, writing letters, thinking. Even silence becomes communal. You settle onto a rough bunk constructed from wood and filled with whatever bedding materials are available. The arrangement is functional. That is perhaps the highest compliment anyone can offer. Comfort remains a distant dream. Functionality feels like success. The walls creak occasionally as wind pushes against them. Smoke drifts upward toward the chimney. The fire crackles steadily. These sounds become the background music of daily life. At first, they seem distracting. Soon, they become familiar. Eventually, they become comforting. Humans adapt remarkably quickly. The hut is never entirely quiet. Someone always seems to be moving, a boot being removed, a blanket being adjusted, a cough, a conversation, a piece of firewood added to the flames. Complete silence rarely exists when a dozen people share one room. Interestingly, some surviving accounts mention soldiers decorating portions of their living spaces whenever possible. Small carvings, personal possessions, drawings, or treasured letters occasionally transformed otherwise plain interiors into places carrying hints of individual identity. Even in difficult circumstances, people want their surroundings to feel personal. You understand the impulse. After all, home is not simply a structure, it is familiarity, and familiarity becomes valuable during uncertain times. As daylight filters through small openings, you observe the rhythms of hut life. One soldier repairs a torn sleeve, another sharpens a tool. A third quietly reads a letter from home for perhaps the 20th time. Nobody interrupts him. Everyone understands. Letters carry enormous emotional weight here. They connect the frozen valley to distant farms, villages, towns, and families. A single sheet of paper can transport someone hundreds of miles away for a few precious minutes. The fire demands constant attention. Wood disappears rapidly, far more rapidly than you would prefer. Every evening begins the same cycle. Gather fuel, stack fuel, burn fuel, repeat. The process never truly ends. Without fire, the hut becomes a wooden box filled with cold air. With fire, it becomes something closer to a home. The distinction matters. Outside, snow begins falling once again. Small flakes drift past the doorway. The weather encourages everyone to remain indoors whenever possible. As a result, the hut feels even more crowded. You sit shoulder to shoulder with men from vastly different backgrounds, a farmer from Massachusetts, a labourer from Pennsylvania, a merchant son from Connecticut, a blacksmith from New Jersey. Before the war, many of these individuals might never have met. Now they share meals, stories, hardships, and living space. The revolution is creating unexpected communities. One particularly amusing tradition involves storytelling contests during long evenings. Soldiers sometimes attempted to outdo one another with exaggerated tales, improbable adventures, or increasingly ridiculous claims. Truth occasionally became an optional participant. This should surprise absolutely no one. Give a group of bored people a fire and an audience, and storytelling soon follows. As afternoon turns toward evening, the interior atmosphere changes. Shadows lengthen. The fire becomes brighter. Conversations grow more relaxed. Work temporarily gives way to rest. You watch sparks rise through the chimney. The simple sight feels strangely hypnotic. A number of historians continue discussing how representative surviving descriptions of hut life truly are. Personal experiences varied significantly depending on rank, location, weather, construction quality, and available resources. Some occupants remembered their shelters relatively positively. Others described ongoing discomfort and crowding. Both perspectives can be true. One person's tolerable shelter may be another person's misery. Context shapes perception. The smell inside the hut deserves special attention. It is impossible to ignore. Wood smoke, wet wool, leather, cooking food, mud, human beings. Everything combines into a scent that no candle company is likely to market anytime soon. Yet after enough time, you barely notice it. Again, adaptation works its quiet magic. As darkness settles, the fire becomes the center of attention. Faces glow orange in the flickering light. Outside, wind brushes against the walls. Inside, warmth gathers around the hearth. Someone begins discussing life before the war. Others join in. The stories flow naturally. Harvest seasons, fishing trips, family gatherings, local festivals. Ordinary memories become treasures when distance separates you from them. You realize that many conversations revolve around the same theme: home. Not because people regret being here, not necessarily, because home represents certainty, and certainty is in short supply at Valley Forge. You pull a blanket closer around your shoulders. The fabric feels rough. The bunk feels hard. The room feels crowded. Yet something else is present, a sense of shared endurance. Everyone here faces the same winter, the same shortages, the same uncertainty. There is comfort in collective experience. The fire burns lower. Several men prepare for sleep. Others continue talking softly. Outside, the frozen landscape stretches beneath a sky filled with stars. Inside, the hut settles into its nighttime rhythm. Wood pops quietly in the hearth. Blankets rustle. Voices fade. You lie back and stare toward the ceiling. The structure is far from perfect. Drafts still find their way inside. Smoke occasionally behaves unpredictably. Space remains limited. But compared to the open wilderness waiting beyond the door, this rough cabin feels almost luxurious. Not because it offers abundance, because it offers refuge. And during the winter of 1777, refuge is one of the most valuable things a person can possess. The first thing you notice this morning is not the cold, it is the sound. A steady scraping noise coming from somewhere outside the hut. You step through the doorway and discover the source almost immediately. A soldier is attempting to repair his shoes, or perhaps rescue them. Repair suggests a condition more optimistic than reality. The leather is worn thin. The sole is separating. Bits of cloth have been added in several places. The entire arrangement appears to be surviving through determination rather than craftsmanship. He is not alone. All around the camp, men inspect clothing, patch garments, and improvise solutions to problems that seem impossible to solve completely. Winter has a way of revealing every weakness, especially weaknesses in clothing. One undeniable reality of the Valley Forge encampment is that shortages of uniforms and footwear became a serious concern. Contemporary observers frequently commented on the inadequate condition of many soldiers' clothing. You look around carefully, the evidence is everywhere. Coats differ in colour and style, and some appear military, others look civilian. Many show signs of repeated repairs. Blankets serve as cloaks. Scarves appear wherever fabric can be found. Nothing matches. Everything is practical. The Continental Army resembles a collection of determined survivors rather than a perfectly dressed military force. Modern armies often create an impression of uniformity. Valley Forge creates an impression of adaptability. You watch a group of soldiers preparing for work. One wraps cloth around his feet before putting on damaged shoes. Another stuffs extra fabric beneath his coat. A third ties portions of a blanket around his shoulders. Fashion has left the conversation entirely. Function reigns supreme. The cold permits no vanity. You begin helping repair clothing alongside several others. The process is surprisingly social. Needles move. Threads are pulled. Conversations drift from one topic to another. Someone complains about the weather. Someone misses home. Someone claims he once owned the finest pair of boots in Pennsylvania. The story grows more impressive with each retelling. By next week, the boots will probably have been made from pure gold. A delightful little detail from camp life involves soldiers borrowing sewing skills from one another. Men who had never expected to spend part of their military service mending garments suddenly found themselves learning practical techniques from more experienced companions. Necessity is an excellent teacher, sometimes a ruthless one. The morning remains bitterly cold. You glance down at your own footwear and immediately feel grateful it remains mostly intact. Others are not so fortunate. The condition of some shoes is alarming. Some are heavily patched. Others contain holes. A few seem only marginally connected to the concept of footwear. Every journey across frozen ground becomes uncomfortable. Every work assignment becomes more difficult. Every cold morning becomes a test of endurance. The problem extends beyond simple discomfort. Warm clothing protects health. Dry feet matter. Reliable shoes matter. A damaged coat matters. The connection between clothing and survival becomes impossible to ignore. As you walk through camp, you notice how resourceful people become when faced with shortages. Old fabric acquires new purposes. Blankets become coats. Coats become blankets. Worn materials are reused repeatedly. Nothing useful is discarded casually. The value of ordinary objects increases dramatically. A spare pair of stockings can feel like treasure. A sturdy coat can inspire envy. A good blanket can improve an entire week. The snow crunches beneath your feet as you move between rows of huts. Smoke rises steadily into the pale winter sky. The camp remains active despite the conditions. Wood gathering continues. Repairs continue. Military duties continue. Life at Valley Forge rarely pauses. Even when everyone would quite enjoy a pause, you encounter a small group gathered around a fire. Their conversation revolves entirely around shoes, not politics, not battle, not military strategy. Shoes. Specifically, the best shoes they ever owned, the warmest shoes, the strongest shoes, the most comfortable shoes. Listening to them feels oddly familiar. Human beings can spend remarkable amounts of time discussing objects they desperately wish they possessed. Several researchers have examined reports concerning soldiers marching with inadequate footwear and have attempted to determine how widespread the problem became during various stages of the encampment. The surviving evidence strongly suggests genuine hardship, though specialists continue exploring the exact scale and timing of the shortages. Regardless of percentages or statistics, the lived experience remains clear. Cold feet are persuasive. You do not need a report to explain them. By midday, the sun appears briefly through the clouds. The extra light improves morale more than temperature. People naturally drift toward brighter spaces. Faces seem more animated. Conversations become livelier. A little sunlight goes a long way during winter. You spend part of the afternoon assisting with the distribution of clothing supplies that have recently arrived. The excitement is immediate. Men examine garments carefully. A usable coat changes hands. A blanket finds a new owner. A pair of stockings receives the kind of appreciation usually reserved for winning lottery tickets. The reaction makes perfect sense. Comfort has become precious. One rarely mentioned but fascinating observation comes from letters describing how soldiers judged one another's luck according to practical possessions. A man with decent shoes, a reliable blanket, and a sturdy coat might be viewed as exceptionally fortunate regardless of anything else. Perspective adjusts itself according to circumstances. The afternoon slowly fades. Long shadows stretch across the snow. The wind begins strengthening once more. Everyone notices. The familiar evening preparations begin. Fires are tended. Doors are secured. Blankets are gathered. People retreat towards shelter. Inside the hut, the atmosphere feels pleasantly warm compared to the world outside. Several soldiers continue repairing garments by firelight. Needles flash in the glow. Thread passes through worn fabric. The work is quiet and repetitive, almost meditative. You watch one particularly skilled soldier reinforce a damaged sleeve. His hands move confidently. Others observe carefully, hoping to learn. Knowledge spreads through simple observation. No classroom required. As darkness settles over Valley Forge, you reflect on how easily modern people overlook clothing. A coat becomes routine. Shoes become ordinary. Warm socks become forgettable. At Valley Forge, none of these things are ordinary. Each item stands between a person and the relentless Pennsylvania winter. The fire crackles softly. Outside, the wind brushes against the hut walls. Inside, men settle beneath blankets and prepare for another cold night. Tomorrow will bring more work, more repairs, more improvisation, and more evidence that survival often depends less on grand victories than on 100 small acts of resourcefulness. Tonight, those patched coats and repaired shoes may not look impressive, but they are helping carry an army through winter, and that makes them extraordinary. The winter camp now feels familiar. The rows of huts, the smoke drifting across the hills, the constant rhythm of work, the endless conversation about weather, food, clothing, and home. Yet above all of these daily concerns stands one figure whose responsibilities extend far beyond any single hut or fire. George Washington. You do not encounter him every day. Most soldiers do not. Valley Forge is home to thousands of people, and its commander cannot be everywhere at once. Yet his presence seems to reach every corner of the encampment. His decisions shape daily life. His reputation influences morale. His determination affects the entire army. You step outside shortly after sunrise and notice unusual activity near one of the main roads. Riders move through camp carrying messages. Officers come and go. Conversations become quieter as people notice important figures passing nearby. Something is happening. Or perhaps more accurately, leadership is happening. Much of it occurs through meetings, correspondence, planning, and administration rather than dramatic speeches delivered atop windswept hills. Reality is often less theatrical than paintings suggest. A well-supported historical observation is that Washington remained with the Continental Army throughout the Valley Forge encampment, overseeing operations during one of the most challenging periods of the Revolutionary War. His task is enormous. The army needs food, the army needs clothing, the army needs discipline, The army needs organization. The army needs hope. Each problem influences the others. Success in one area rarely solves everything. You walk toward a gathering of soldiers discussing recent developments. Opinions vary. Some admire Washington deeply. Others occasionally question decisions. Such discussions are normal. Armies consist of human beings, and human beings have opinions about leadership. Then, now, always. What seems consistent is the recognition that the commander faces extraordinary pressures. The war itself remains uncertain. Resources remain limited. Political disagreements continue beyond the camp. Meanwhile, winter settles heavily across Pennsylvania. Not exactly an ideal management environment. One charming story, often repeated, involves Washington's reputation for maintaining dignity and composure even under difficult circumstances. Whether dealing with politicians, officers, supply issues, or miserable weather, he generally projected steadiness. In a camp filled with uncertainty, that quality carried tremendous value. People watch leaders carefully during difficult times. Perhaps more carefully than leaders realize. Confidence can spread, so can despair. As the morning continues, you observe officers moving between sections of camp. Orders are delivered, reports are collected, inspections occur. The machinery of command never stops operating. From a distance, military leadership may appear glamorous. Up close, much of it resembles administration. Letters, meetings, logistics, paperwork, endless decisions. You briefly glimpse Washington riding through part of the encampment. The reaction is noticeable. Men straighten slightly. Conversations pause. Attention follows him. Not because he is a king. The revolution opposes kings. Because he has become a symbol. Symbols matter, especially during hardship. The horse beneath him looks considerably more comfortable than most people present. Several soldiers quietly observe this fact. A few make jokes. The jokes remain respectful. Mostly. The relationship between soldiers and commanders is rarely simple. Admiration often coexists with complaint. You can respect leadership while still wishing for better rations. In fact, history suggests many people have mastered this exact combination. By midday, the camp resumes its normal rhythm. Work crews head toward the woods. Repairs continue. Smoke rises from chimneys. Yet the broader questions remain. Can the army survive winter? Can it improve? Can it emerge stronger than it entered? Those questions occupy leaders constantly. One lesser-known detail involves the immense volume of correspondence Washington handled. Letters flowed into and out of headquarters almost continuously. Requests, reports, complaints, recommendations, and updates filled his days. The image of a commander spending hours writing may seem less exciting than battlefield heroics, but it was essential work. Wars often depend on paperwork more than popular imagination prefers. You spend part of the afternoon assisting with routine camp duties. As you work, conversations drift toward leadership. Some men discuss recent orders, others speculate about future campaigns. A few debate military strategy despite possessing no special expertise whatsoever. This tradition, too, appears timeless. Give people enough confidence and limited information, and military analysis soon follows. The winter sun hangs low above the horizon. Its pale light stretches across the valley. The scene appears calm, almost peaceful, yet beneath that calm lies enormous pressure. Washington knows the army must not merely survive, it must improve. Survival alone is not enough. The war will continue after winter. Preparation matters. Training matters. Discipline matters. Future victories may depend on decisions being made right now. A number of scholars continue examining which aspects of Washington's leadership proved most important during Valley Forge. Some emphasize logistics, others focus on morale, others highlight political skill or long-term strategic thinking. The discussion remains active because leadership itself is difficult to measure. People often recognize good leadership when they experience it. Explaining exactly why it works can be harder. As evening approaches, the temperature begins falling once again. Fires brighten throughout camp. The familiar scent of wood smoke returns. Inside the hut, several soldiers discuss stories they have heard about Washington. Some are undoubtedly true, some are probably embellished. A few seem to improve dramatically with each retelling. Historical legends have a habit of growing comfortable over time. Still, the stories reveal something meaningful. People want to believe their sacrifices serve a purpose. They want confidence in those guiding them. Trust becomes a form of fuel, not the kind that warms hands, the kind that sustains effort. The fire crackles softly nearby. You sit listening as shadows move across the walls. Outside, darkness settles over Valley Forge. The commander returns to his responsibilities. The soldiers return to theirs. Neither role is easy. Both are necessary. Tomorrow the camp will wake once more. Axes will strike wood. Boots will cross frozen ground. Messages will travel between headquarters and distant locations. The daily struggle will continue. Yet beneath all the uncertainty, a quiet sense of direction persists. Someone is trying to hold this fragile army together. Someone is trying to guide it through winter. And for tonight, that knowledge offers a measure of reassurance in the cold Pennsylvania darkness. Winter has many enemies. Cold is one. Hunger is another. But neither inspires quite the same quiet fear as illness. You begin noticing it gradually. A cough here, a fever there. Someone missing from a work detail. Someone staying inside a hut instead of joining the morning routine. At first, these incidents seem isolated. Then you realize they are everywhere. Disease moves differently than snowstorms. A snowstorm announces its arrival. Illness often enters quietly. You step outside before sunrise and find the camp covered by a thin layer of frost. Smoke curls from chimneys into the pale morning sky. Men move between huts wrapped in coats and blankets. From a distance, the encampment appears orderly and calm. Up close, you hear the coughing. Not one cough. Dozens. Perhaps hundreds. Some mild. Some persistent. Some deep enough to make listeners uneasy. One firmly documented reality of Valley Forge is that disease claimed far more lives than combat during the encampment. Illness became one of the greatest threats facing the Continental Army. The causes are not difficult to understand. Thousands of people live in close quarters. Food remains inconsistent. Winter weakens bodies. Medical knowledge remains limited by modern standards. The result is a perfect environment for sickness to spread. You walk toward one section of camp where medical personnel are working. The building serving as a hospital is busy, very busy. The atmosphere differs noticeably from the rest of the encampment. Conversations remain quieter. Movements seem more deliberate. Faces carry concern. You help carry supplies inside. The smell strikes you immediately. Wood smoke mixes with medicines, damp clothing, and the unmistakable scent of too many people sharing limited space. Rows of patients occupy makeshift beds. Some rest quietly, others shift uncomfortably. A few appear to be improving, others clearly face a harder struggle. The doctors work continuously. Their tools and knowledge are far less advanced than those available today. Yet many approach their duties with determination and skill. They understand the stakes. Every recovered patient strengthens the army. Every loss weakens it. You observe one physician moving from bed to bed, checking symptoms and offering treatment where possible. The process is exhausting. Patients arrive constantly. Needs never end. Resources remain limited. The workload would challenge even a modern medical system. An intriguing historical footnote involves some of the remedies used during the period. Certain treatments now seem ineffective or unusual, while others contained elements that occasionally provided genuine benefit. Medical practitioners worked with the best understanding available to them, even when that understanding proved incomplete. History can be humbling that way. Future generations may someday look back at some of our own practices with equal curiosity. Outside the hospital, camp life continues. Axes still strike wood, fires still burn, meals still need cooking, yet awareness of illness lingers everywhere. You notice people discussing symptoms, comparing experiences, sharing advice, expressing concern for friends. Health becomes a common topic of conversation. The human response feels familiar across centuries. When sickness spreads, communities pay attention. You spend part of the morning helping deliver firewood to several buildings. The cold remains intense. Ironically, the very weather that makes fires essential also creates conditions that encourage people to crowd together indoors. And crowded indoor spaces rarely help prevent disease. The challenge seems impossible to escape. Stay apart and freeze. Stay together and increase certain risks. There are no perfect solutions, only compromises. As midday approaches, weak sunlight filters through clouds. The camp appears almost beautiful beneath the winter light. Snow glitters. Smoke drifts upward. The surrounding hills look peaceful. Beauty and hardship often coexist. History reminds you of that repeatedly. A fascinating anecdote preserved in some accounts describes recovering soldiers becoming local celebrities within their huts. Men who successfully overcame serious illness sometimes found themselves receiving enthusiastic welcomes from companions relieved to see them return. Such moments reveal the emotional bonds forming throughout the encampment. People notice absences. People celebrate returns. Shared hardship creates connections. You stop near a fire where several soldiers warm their hands. Their discussion centers on a friend currently recovering from illness. Nobody speaks dramatically. Nobody gives a grand speech. They simply hope he gets better. Sometimes care expresses itself through ordinary conversation. The afternoon passes slowly. Clouds gather overhead. The wind shifts. You continue moving between different parts of camp and begin noticing another important group. Women. Some assist with nursing. Others prepare food. Others wash clothing. Many contribute essential labor that supports both patients and healthy soldiers alike. Without these efforts, conditions would become even more difficult. Every functioning community depends upon visible and invisible work. Valley Forge is no exception. Modern researchers continue exploring the relative impact of different diseases present during the encampment. Historical records identify several illnesses, but determining precise numbers remains challenging. Specialists continue examining evidence to better understand exactly how disease affected various parts of the army throughout the winter. What remains clear is the scale of the challenge. Military success alone could not save the army. Health mattered, sanitation mattered, nutrition mattered, recovery mattered. The struggle for survival extended far beyond battlefields. By late afternoon, the sky darkens. Snow begins falling once again. The flakes drift gently through the air. Soldiers hurry to complete outdoor tasks before conditions worsen. Doors close. Fires brighten. The camp gradually retreats indoors. You return to your hut carrying another load of firewood. Inside, familiar faces gather around the hearth. The atmosphere feels quieter tonight. Someone mentions a sick friend. Another asks whether conditions are improving at the hospital. The conversation drifts naturally toward health. No one can entirely ignore the subject. The fire crackles softly. Orange light dances across the walls. Outside, snow settles over rooftops and pathways. Inside, warmth provides temporary refuge. You think about the people working in the hospital, the patients, the nurses, the doctors, the families far away who know nothing about the specific challenges unfolding here. Winter continues testing everyone at Valley Forge in different ways. Some battle hunger, some battle cold, some battle illness. Many battle all three. Yet each morning the camp wakes again. The fires are lit, the work resumes, the community endures. And tonight, beneath falling snow and drifting smoke, thousands of people continue holding on to the simple hope that tomorrow will bring a little more strength than today. As the winter deepens, you begin to notice a truth that is easy to miss in traditional stories about Valley Forge. The camp is not populated solely by soldiers. Look closely enough and you'll see women carrying water through the snow, women stirring kettles over open fires, women washing clothes in freezing conditions, women tending children, women caring for the sick, women helping hold together the fragile daily life of the encampment. Without them, the camp would function very differently, perhaps not function at all. You step outside shortly after dawn and watch the valley awaken beneath a blanket of grey clouds. Smoke rises from hundreds of chimneys. Frost sparkles along rooftops. The familiar sounds of camp life gradually emerge from the cold morning air. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs. The sound surprises you. Then you remember. Families are here too, not everywhere, not in overwhelming numbers, but enough to remind you that military camps often contain more than armies. A well-established historical reality is that many women accompanied the Continental Army as camp followers, performing essential labour such as cooking, washing, nursing, and various support tasks. The term camp follower can sound dismissive to modern ears. The actual work was anything but insignificant. You follow a path between huts and observe several women already beginning their daily routines. One carries a heavy bucket, another hangs damp clothing near a fire, a third prepares food while keeping an eye on a young child. The tasks appear ordinary. That is precisely what makes them important. Ordinary tasks sustain extraordinary situations. History often celebrates battles. Less attention goes to laundry, yet armies require both. You spend part of the morning helping transport supplies. Along the way, you speak with a woman whose husband serves in the army. She laughs when someone describes camp life as adventurous. Her expression suggests that adventure is not the word she would choose. Hard work seems more accurate. The winter leaves little room for romantic illusions. Every bucket of water must be carried, every meal prepared, every garment cleaned, every sick person cared for. These responsibilities continue regardless of weather. The snow certainly does not volunteer to help. One particularly memorable detail preserved in some accounts involves women developing remarkable skill at stretching limited resources. A small amount of food, fuel, fabric, or soap often had to accomplish far more than anyone would consider reasonable. Resourcefulness became a daily necessity. You quickly realize that survival at Valley Forge depends heavily upon such resourcefulness. The camp functions through countless acts of adaptation. Nothing comes easily. Everything requires effort. As the morning progresses, you visit an area where clothing is being washed. The conditions seem deeply unfair. Cold water, cold air, cold hands. And yet the work continues. Clean clothing contributes to health. Health contributes to survival. The connection may not seem dramatic, but it is vital. Nearby, children move carefully between huts. Some assist with simple tasks. Others remain close to family members. Their presence changes the atmosphere in subtle ways. Military camps can feel harsh. Children remind everyone that ordinary life still exists beyond military concerns. A game played in the snow, a laugh, a curious question. Small moments interrupt the seriousness of winter. You notice soldiers responding warmly to these interruptions, perhaps because they provide reminders of home, perhaps because they offer brief escapes from hardship, perhaps because both explanations are true. The midday sky remains overcast. A light wind sweeps across the valley. You pull your coat tighter and continue walking through camp. Everywhere you look, women are working, cooking, sewing, cleaning, nursing, organising, carrying. The labour rarely stops. A fascinating historical observation is that some women became well known within particular sections of camp because of their reliability, skill, or strong personalities. Reputation mattered in communities where people interacted daily under difficult circumstances. You can understand why. Competence becomes highly visible when conditions are challenging. People remember those who help. People remember those who contribute. Communities develop their own forms of respect. As afternoon arrives, you assist at a cooking area where large kettles hang above fires. Steam rises into the cold air. The smell immediately attracts attention. Hungry soldiers appear with remarkable efficiency whenever food is involved. This phenomenon seems entirely predictable. The women managing the operation appear unimpressed by the sudden audience. They have seen it before, many times. The work requires organisation, patience, and persistence. Preparing food for large groups is difficult under ideal circumstances. Valley Forge offers very few ideal circumstances. You listen to conversations while helping distribute supplies. The topics sound familiar. Weather, families, food, health, future plans. People remain people regardless of century. The concerns change less than you might expect. Several modern historians continue exploring the experiences of women at Valley Forge because surviving records often focus more heavily on military leaders and soldiers. Researchers continue piecing together individual stories in order to better understand the full social landscape of the encampment. Every new detail adds depth. History becomes richer when more voices are included. As daylight begins fading, the camp gradually shifts toward evening routines. Smoke thickens above the rooftops. Doors open and close. People return to shelter. The familiar rhythm repeats itself. Inside your hut, the fire glows warmly. Several soldiers discuss events of the day. One mentions a woman who helped care for a sick companion. Another praises a meal prepared under difficult conditions. The comments are casual, yet they reveal appreciation. Not every contribution appears in official reports. Not every contribution receives recognition. Many remain woven quietly into daily life. Outside, darkness settles across Valley Forge once again. The winter wind moves gently through the trees. Snow reflects faint starlight. The camp glows with hundreds of small fires. Within those circles of light, women continue mending clothing, continue preparing food, continue caring for families, continue supporting an army struggling through one of the hardest winters in its history. Their work rarely makes headlines. It rarely inspires statues. Yet tonight, as the frozen valley settles into silence, you understand something important. The story of Valley Forge belongs to far more people than the soldiers carrying muskets, and the winter could not have been endured without them. The winter at Valley Forge is not a season of waiting. That may be one of the biggest surprises. From a distance, people sometimes imagine the army simply enduring the cold until spring arrives. In reality, the camp remains busy from dawn until darkness. Work fills nearly every day. Work fills nearly every hour. Even now, after weeks of snow, shortages, and hardship, the camp wakes before sunrise and immediately begins moving. You leave the hut while the sky is still dark blue. The stars have not fully faded. Smoke already rises from several chimneys. Some people are feeding fires, others are preparing food, others are gathering tools. The day begins long before the sun. You join a work party heading toward the woods. Fresh firewood is needed. Again, always again. Valley Forge seems to consume wood at a remarkable pace. Huts require heat. Cooking requires fuel. Workshops require fuel. Hospitals require fuel. Thousands of people living through winter create an endless appetite for firewood. A frequently noted fact from the encampment is that soldiers spent large portions of their time performing labour essential to maintaining the camp, rather than preparing directly for combat. The distinction is important. Military life involves far more than battles. Most days contain no battles at all. Most days contain tasks. Necessary, repetitive, exhausting tasks. The forest greets you with silence broken only by axes. The familiar rhythm returns. Wood chips scatter across frozen ground. Trees fall. Logs are cut and loaded. Men wipe sweat from their brows despite the cold. Physical labour generates its own warmth. For a while, you almost forget the temperature. Then the wind reminds you. The wind never seems to miss an opportunity. By mid-morning you return carrying a heavy load. The camp has become a network of ongoing projects. Some soldiers repair roads damaged by weather. Others improve drainage around huts. Others transport supplies. Others maintain equipment. Everywhere you look, people are working. The army resembles a small town more than a temporary military camp. Perhaps that is inevitable. Any place housing thousands of people develops similar needs. Roads, shelter, sanitation, storage, maintenance. Civilization does not appear by magic. It requires constant effort. You spend part of the morning helping clear pathways between rows of huts. Recent snowfall has created obstacles. Movement becomes difficult if routes remain neglected. A wagon stuck in snow or mud helps no one. As you shovel and scrape frozen ground, conversations drift naturally among the workers. The topics vary: food shortages, home, weather predictions, rumours from distant places. One man confidently predicts an early spring. Nobody seems willing to commit emotionally to this possibility. Winter has damaged trust. A delightful little glimpse into camp life comes from reports of soldiers inventing informal competitions to make routine work more tolerable. Crews sometimes challenged one another to finish tasks first or complete assignments more efficiently, turning labour into a form of entertainment. You can understand the appeal. People naturally seek ways to make repetitive work feel less repetitive. The alternative is focusing entirely on how cold your hands feel. Around noon, the clouds part briefly. Sunlight spreads across the valley. The effect is remarkable. Everything appears brighter. Snow sparkles. Smoke drifts upward in golden light. Faces seem slightly more cheerful. The warmth itself remains modest. The psychological effect is enormous. Humans are surprisingly responsive to sunlight. Even a short appearance feels like encouragement. You continue toward another section of camp where repairs are underway. Several huts require attention. Winter constantly finds weaknesses: a loose board, a drafty wall, a leaking roof. Small problems become large problems quickly. The repair crews move efficiently. Experience has taught them what matters most. Keeping cold air outside ranks very highly on that list. As afternoon progresses, you assist with carrying supplies from recently arrived wagons. The task involves lifting, organising, counting, and distributing. Nothing dramatic. Yet these ordinary activities sustain the entire encampment. Without organisation, supplies disappear into confusion. Without labour, supplies remain useless. Without cooperation, little gets accomplished. One observation that fascinates many historians is how much practical knowledge circulated informally through the camp. Soldiers learned construction skills, repair techniques, logistical methods, and survival strategies simply by working alongside one another. Valley Forge becomes an unexpected classroom, not by design, by necessity. The lessons are practical. The instructors are often whoever happens to know the answer. The afternoon grows colder. Clouds return. The pale winter sun begins sinking towards the horizon. Work continues. People move with the quiet determination that has become familiar throughout the encampment. Nobody appears enthusiastic about every task. Nobody wakes excited to repair drainage ditches. Yet the work gets done. That may be the more impressive achievement. You pause briefly atop a ridge and look across the valley. From here, the scale of human effort becomes visible. Rows of huts, paths winding through snow, smoke rising steadily, workers moving in every direction. The camp feels alive, not thriving and not comfortable. Alive. There is a difference. Some historical specialists continue discussing which aspect of daily labour contributed most significantly to the army's ability to endure the winter. Supply management, construction projects, sanitation efforts, and infrastructure improvements all played important roles, making it difficult to identify a single decisive factor. Perhaps that complexity reflects reality. Large communities survive through many interconnected efforts. No single task carries the entire burden. As evening approaches, the work finally begins slowing. Tools are returned, wood is stacked, assignments conclude. The camp gradually shifts toward nighttime routines. You return to your hut tired but satisfied. The kind of tiredness that comes from accomplishing tangible things. A repaired road, a cleared path, a load of firewood delivered where it was needed, small victories. Yet Valley Forge is built from small victories. The fire inside the hut burns brightly. Several companions have already gathered around it. Someone is preparing a meal, someone else is mending clothing. Another sits quietly reading a letter. The familiar evening scene unfolds once more. Outside. Darkness settles over the Pennsylvania countryside. Inside. The warmth feels earned. You stretch tired muscles and watch sparks rise from the hearth. Tomorrow will bring another list of tasks, another round of repairs, another search for efficiency, another day of labour. The army remains in winter quarters, but it is far from idle. Every road cleared, every wall repaired, every log carried, every supply delivered. Together, they are helping transform endurance into survival. And survival, one day at a time, remains the most important work of all. By this point in the winter, you could probably navigate Valley Forge with your eyes closed, at least until you walk directly into a wagon, a woodpile, or an irritated horse. The camp has developed its own rhythms, its own sounds, its own personality. You know where the busiest pathways are located. You know which chimneys produce the thickest smoke. You know where laughter tends to gather in the evenings, and you know that silence is actually quite rare. For a place remembered primarily for hardship, Valley Forge is surprisingly noisy. You step outside before sunrise and pause to listen. The darkness still blankets the valley. Stars remain visible overhead. For a few brief moments, the world feels almost motionless. Then the first sounds emerge. A door creaks open. Someone coughs. A horse shifts in its stall. Wood strikes wood as a fire is fed. The camp begins waking. The transformation happens gradually, like an orchestra tuning before a performance. One well-documented aspect of military encampments is the constant presence of sound. Thousands of people living and working together naturally create a continuous backdrop of activity. Even during winter, by dawn, the valley is fully awake. Axes ring through the woods. Boots crunch over frozen ground. Voices call across pathways. Wagons rattle over rough roads. Dogs bark occasionally. Children laugh somewhere in the distance. Smoke rises into the cold morning air while the camp hums with life. You realize that every sound carries information. The sharp rhythm of chopping means firewood is being gathered. The creak of wagons suggests supplies are moving. The crackling of fires means warmth and cooking. Even the direction of voices helps orient you. The camp communicates constantly, not through formal announcements, through daily noise. As you walk along one of the main paths, you notice how different sections of Valley Forge possess slightly different atmospheres. Near the supply areas, wagons dominate the soundscape. Near the woods, axes and falling trees create a steady rhythm. Near the hospital, voices tend to remain lower and more careful. Near cooking areas, conversation competes with bubbling kettles and clattering utensils. Each location develops its own identity. You stop beside a work crew repairing equipment. Metal tools strike wood with measured precision. The workers barely notice the sounds anymore. Familiar noises fade into the background. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to adapt. The extraordinary eventually becomes ordinary. An amusing detail preserved in personal recollections describes soldiers becoming so accustomed to camp sounds that unusual silence sometimes felt more unsettling than noise. A suddenly quiet camp could prompt people to wonder whether something unexpected was happening. The observation feels surprisingly relatable. Silence often attracts attention precisely because it breaks routine. By mid-morning, the camp reaches full activity. The soundscape grows richer. A blacksmith works nearby. The ringing of metal carries through the crisp air. Children run between huts. Horses snort and stamp. Someone begins singing while hauling supplies. The song is not particularly polished. Nobody seems concerned. Professional standards are not the point. Morale is. You continue through the camp and notice another recurring sound. Laughter. Not constant laughter. Not overwhelming laughter, but enough to surprise someone expecting only misery. Hardship and humour frequently coexist. Perhaps they need each other. People facing difficulties often become skilled at finding reasons to laugh. The alternatives are less appealing. The winter sun rises weakly behind drifting clouds. Its pale light spreads across rooftops and snowy paths. The camp looks almost picturesque from a distance. A painting, a postcard, a historical scene. Then you move closer and hear someone arguing with a stubborn mule. The illusion becomes wonderfully human again. One particularly charming tidbit comes from descriptions of soldiers developing nicknames for fellow camp residents, animals, and even certain locations. Communities naturally create their own internal language, and Valley Forge was no exception. The names do not always survive in official records. The habit certainly survives in human nature. Around noon, you sit near a fire and simply listen. The experience becomes unexpectedly fascinating. The camp sounds different than it did earlier in winter. Construction noise has diminished somewhat. Routine noise has increased. The settlement feels more established, more organized, more lived in. You can hear the difference. The transition from temporary encampment to functioning winter community is audible. Researchers continue examining personal accounts to better understand daily social life at Valley Forge. Official reports describe logistics, leadership, and military matters, but letters and journals often reveal the sounds, conversations, and routines that shaped ordinary experience. Those details bring history closer. You can count soldiers, you can map huts, you can measure supplies. But the sound of daily life offers something statistics cannot. Atmosphere. The afternoon passes quietly. Well, relatively quietly. This is still a camp containing thousands of people. Absolute quiet remains theoretical. Clouds drift across the sky. A cold breeze moves through the trees. The familiar pattern of work continues. Everywhere you go, the sounds blend together into a kind of winter symphony. Axes or voices to footsteps and fires, animals, tools. None are remarkable individually. Together, they define Valley Forge. As evening approaches, the character of the camp changes once again. Outdoor sounds begin fading. People return towards shelter. Doors close. Work concludes. The noise softens, not disappears. Softens. You return to your hut as darkness settles across the valley. Inside, the atmosphere feels warm and familiar. Several companions are already gathered around the hearth. Someone stirs a pot. Someone repairs clothing. Someone tells a story. The fire crackles steadily. Outside, the wind brushes against the walls. Inside, conversation rises and falls gently. A number of historians continue discussing how much daily morale depended upon these ordinary social interactions. Grand speeches and major events certainly mattered, but many scholars suggest the smaller rhythms of companionship, routine, and shared experience played an equally important role. The argument makes sense. Most lives are shaped by ordinary moments more often than extraordinary ones. The fire burns lower. Voices gradually soften. The camp settles towards sleep. Yet even now, complete silence never arrives. Somewhere outside, a horse shifts. A door closes. Footsteps cross frozen ground. A distant voice calls through the darkness. Valley Forge breathes, not as an army alone, as a community. A cold, crowded, determined community carrying on through another winter night. And as you listen to the fading sounds beyond the walls, you realize they have become as familiar as the beating of your own heart. Winter can make the world feel smaller. The hills surrounding Valley Forge seem farther away beneath snow and cloud. Roads become more difficult. Travel becomes less appealing. People spend more time indoors, gathered around fires and sheltered from the cold. In such circumstances, something unexpected becomes especially important. Hope, not the loud, triumphant kind found in patriotic paintings, the quieter kind, the kind that survives one difficult day and then another, the kind that sits beside a fire and whispers that spring will eventually arrive. You wake before dawn and notice the camp feels unusually still, not silent. Valley Forge is rarely silent, but calmer. The air is cold enough to make every breath visible. Frost clings to rooftops. The sky above the valley is clear, revealing countless stars. It is beautiful. It is also freezing. Nature enjoys presenting both qualities simultaneously. You make your way toward a nearby fire where several soldiers are already warming their hands. Nobody speaks immediately. The flames provide their own comfort. Eventually conversation begins. Not about supplies, not about weather, not about military duties. Today the discussion drifts toward home. Again, home appears frequently in winter conversations, perhaps because memory itself becomes a source of warmth. One well-supported historical observation is that religion played a significant role in the lives of many people at Valley Forge. Religious services, personal prayer, and spiritual reflection offered comfort during difficult months. Faith expresses itself in different ways throughout the camp. Some attend formal services when available. Some pray privately. Some read religious texts. Others simply reflect quietly beside a fire. The specific practice matters less than the broader purpose. People seek meaning. People seek reassurance. People seek strength. Valley Forge offers many reasons to do so. You continue walking through camp as dawn gradually brightens the landscape. Smoke rises from chimneys. Snow crunches beneath your boots. The familiar sounds of activity begin returning. Yet today your attention lingers on the smaller moments. A soldier sharing food with a companion. Someone helping repair a damaged coat. A group gathering around a fire. Hope often appears in practical forms, not speeches, actions. The camp survives through thousands of small acts of cooperation. You stop near a hut where several men are singing quietly while completing routine tasks. The song is simple, the voices imperfect, the effect surprisingly powerful. Music changes atmosphere, always has, always will. For a few minutes, the winter feels less heavy. A curious detail from personal recollection suggests that songs, poems, and recitations sometimes circulated through camp during long evenings. Entertainment options were limited, so even modest performances could attract appreciative audiences. It does not take much to brighten a difficult day. A story, a joke, a song, a letter. Human beings have always known this. As morning advances, you assist with routine duties around camp. The work remains familiar, carrying supplies, gathering fuel, maintaining equipment, yet something feels different today. Perhaps it is the clear sky. Perhaps it is the sunlight reflecting off snow. Perhaps it is simply one of those days when spirits rise slightly higher than usual. Such days matter. Morale rarely changes dramatically. More often it shifts gradually. One good day, then another, then another. By midday, groups gather outdoors wherever sunlight reaches the ground. The warmth remains limited. The psychological benefit remains enormous. Faces turn toward the light instinctively. People linger a little longer. Conversations continue a little more easily. Winter teaches appreciation for simple things. Sunshine becomes an event. A calm day becomes a gift. A warm meal becomes memorable. You sit beside a fire and listen to stories from fellow soldiers. One recalls a childhood Christmas. Another describes fishing trips from years earlier. A third remembers a local celebration back home. The details differ. The emotions feel familiar. Memory allows people to travel without moving. It allows them to revisit places beyond the valley. One particularly touching observation appears in letters written during the encampment. Many correspondents made deliberate efforts to reassure loved ones back home, even when their own circumstances were difficult. Protecting others from worry became an act of care. There is something deeply human about that. The desire to comfort others while carrying your own burdens. As afternoon unfolds, you notice several informal gatherings throughout camp, friends talking, family spending time together, people sharing food and conversation. No official event has been announced. No grand celebration is taking place. Yet community itself creates occasions. A settlement of thousands naturally generates social life. The winter has not extinguished that reality. Far from it. Many specialists who study Valley Forge continue examining the role morale played during the encampment. While material conditions certainly mattered, researchers frequently note that emotional resilience, social bonds, leadership, and shared purpose also contributed significantly to the Army's ability to endure. Numbers tell part of the story. Human relationships tell another part. As daylight begins fading, the valley takes on a golden glow. Sunlight reflects from snow-covered roofs. Smoke drifts lazily through the cold air. For a brief moment, the camp looks almost peaceful enough to forget its hardships. Almost. Then a gust of icy wind arrives and restores perspective. Winter remains very much in charge. You return toward your hut as evening approaches. The familiar routines begin. Fires are fed, meals are prepared, doors close against the cold. Inside, the atmosphere feels welcoming. Several companions gather near the hearth. Someone produces a letter recently received from home. The contents are shared aloud. News from distant places travels through the room. People listen carefully. Every detail matters. Every connection matters. Outside, darkness settles across the Pennsylvania countryside. Inside, the firelight flickers softly against the walls. Conversation continues. Stories continue. Friendships continue. The winter continues, yet so does hope. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily. Like the glow of embers after the flames have settled, a small source of warmth, a small source of light, enough to help carry people through another long night at Valley Forge. One cold morning, a rumour begins moving through camp. Rumours travel quickly at Valley Forge, faster than wagons, faster than supply reports, possibly faster than some horses. This particular rumour concerns a foreign officer, an experienced soldier from Europe, a man with a long title, an impressive reputation, and a talent for military training. As the story spreads from hut to hut, curiosity grows. His name is Baron von Steuben, and although few people realize it yet, his arrival will help change the future of the Continental Army. You step outside shortly after dawn and find the camp wrapped in a pale winter mist. Smoke rises through the fog. Frost glitters on rooftops. Men move between huts carrying tools, supplies, and firewood. At first glance, it seems like an ordinary day. Yet conversations keep returning to the same topic. The new arrival, the European officer, the Baron. People speculate constantly. What is he like? How much military experience does he possess? Can he really improve the army? Does he speak English? That last question turns out to be particularly important. A widely recognized historical fact is that Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben arrived at Valley Forge in February 1778 and soon began introducing new methods of military training and organization. At the moment, however, he remains something of a mystery. You hear several versions of his background before breakfast. Each version becomes slightly more impressive than the last. By midday, one storyteller seems prepared to credit him with personally winning every war in European history. Historical accuracy occasionally struggles against enthusiasm. Eventually, you catch sight of the man himself. He does not arrive surrounded by magical light or dramatic music. History rarely provides such conveniences. Instead, you see a professional soldier carrying himself with confidence and purpose. The impression is immediate. He appears like someone accustomed to order. Valley Forge, despite all its progress, still contains plenty of disorder. Perhaps that explains why his presence attracts attention. The camp has survived the winter thus far. Survival, however, is not the same as preparation. Spring will eventually arrive. Campaigns will resume. Battles will return. The army must be ready. You continue your daily duties while conversations about von Steuben spread through camp. Opinions vary. Some soldiers are intrigued. Others remain skeptical. A few simply hope the newcomer can somehow improve rations. This expectation may exceed the scope of military training. Still, hunger encourages creative optimism. One amusing anecdote associated with von Steuben involves his language difficulties. Because his English was limited, instructions often passed through translators and assistants. The process occasionally produced moments of confusion, frustration, and unintended humour. Communication challenges have existed for as long as people have attempted communication. The winter afternoon unfolds beneath grey skies. You spend part of the day helping transport supplies. Along the way, you notice increased activity among officers. Meetings occur. Discussions take place. Plans develop. Something is beginning. Not a battle, a transformation. At least that is the hope. Military organizations are complicated things. Equipment matters. Leadership matters. Supplies matter. Training matters too. Perhaps more than many people realize. An army can possess courage and still struggle. An army can possess determination and still make mistakes. Experience and discipline often make the difference. As evening approaches, you return toward your section of camp. The air smells of wood smoke. Snow crunches beneath your boots. The familiar rhythms of Valley Forge continue, yet a sense of anticipation lingers. People are curious. Curiosity itself becomes a source of energy. Inside the hut, the conversation quickly turns toward the new officer. Several men exchange stories they've heard. One account contradicts another. A third seems entirely invented. Nobody appears particularly concerned about verification. The fire burns brightly. Speculation flourishes. You sit quietly and listen. It occurs to you that Valley Forge has changed significantly since your arrival. The camp now feels more organized, more stable, more capable. The arrival of new leadership and fresh ideas seems like a natural next step. Not everyone embraces change immediately. Few communities do. Yet there is growing recognition that improvement remains possible. The army has endured. Now it must evolve. A lesser-known detail often mentioned by historians is that von Steuben impressed many observers through practical instruction rather than abstract theory. He focused on showing soldiers exactly what to do and how to do it effectively. Practical knowledge tends to earn respect quickly, especially among people accustomed to hard work. Outside, darkness settles over the valley. The stars emerge one by one. The wind moves gently through the trees. Inside, firelight flickers across familiar faces. You think about the months already past, the hunger, the cold, the construction of huts, the endless labour, the illnesses, the small victories. Valley Forge has demanded endurance. Now it may begin demanding growth. Many historical researchers continue discussing the precise extent of von Steuben's influence compared with other factors shaping the Continental Army. Most agree his contributions prove significant, though experts continue exploring how training, leadership, experience, and organizational changes interacted during this critical period. History rarely depends upon a single person, yet individuals can matter enormously. The Baron appears to be one of those individuals. The fire crackles softly. Someone yawns. Another soldier adds fresh wood to the hearth. The familiar evening routine continues. Tomorrow will bring more work, perhaps new drills, perhaps new expectations, perhaps new frustrations. Change often includes all three. For tonight, however, the camp remains at rest. The winter still surrounds Valley Forge. The snow still covers the ground. The cold still lingers beyond every wall. Yet somewhere within this sprawling settlement, a new chapter has quietly begun. And before long, the soldiers of Valley Forge will discover that surviving winter was only part of the challenge. Learning how to become something stronger comes next. The next morning begins with confusion, not disaster, not panic, confusion. You stand in the cold with dozens of other soldiers while instructions pass from one person to another. People shift positions. Questions are asked. Corrections follow. A few men glance at one another with expressions suggesting they are not entirely certain what is happening. Then the drills begin. This is the new phase of life at Valley Forge, not merely surviving, training, learning, improving. The winter still surrounds the camp, but attention is increasingly turning toward the future. Spring may seem distant, yet preparation cannot wait for warm weather. You take your place in formation. The ground beneath your boots is hard and cold. Frost sparkles in the morning sunlight. Breath rises from hundreds of mouths in pale clouds. Around you stand men from different colonies and backgrounds. Some possess military experience. Others possess very little. The challenge facing instructors is obvious. How do you transform a collection of volunteers into a more disciplined fighting force? A cornerstone of von Steuben's training program involved standardizing military drills and procedures, so soldiers throughout the army could operate more effectively together. The concept sounds straightforward. The execution proves more complicated. People must learn new movements, new commands, new expectations. Old habits resist replacement. Human beings generally prefer competence before instruction. Unfortunately, instruction usually comes first. The morning quickly becomes an exercise in repetition. Stand here, move there, turn, march, repeat, then repeat again, and perhaps once more for good measure. The process can feel tedious, yet repetition serves a purpose. Skills become reliable through practice. No shortcut exists. You watch instructors move through the formations correcting mistakes. There are many mistakes. Fortunately, there are many opportunities to improve. One soldier turns the wrong direction, another misinterprets a command, a third reacts a moment too slowly. Nobody performs perfectly. That is why they are training. The cold adds another layer of difficulty. Frozen fingers struggle with equipment. Heavy clothing restricts movement. Wind occasionally carries instructions away before everyone hears them. Winter remains determined to participate in every activity. An entertaining detail often associated with von Steuben's training methods involves his colourful reactions when soldiers made errors. Because of language barriers and his strong personality, stories emerged describing creative expressions of frustration that became legendary within camp. Whether every story is entirely accurate hardly matters. The reputation certainly survived. By midday, you begin noticing gradual improvements. Not dramatic improvements, small ones. Formations look slightly sharper. Movements appear slightly more coordinated. Commands produce more consistent responses. Progress rarely announces itself with fanfare. It accumulates quietly. You pause briefly during a break and look across the training area. The scene differs significantly from the valley forge you first encountered. The camp still contains hunger, cold, and hardship, yet now it also contains purpose. The soldiers are not merely enduring winter, they are preparing for what comes after. That distinction matters. Preparation creates momentum. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence changes how people carry themselves. The afternoon continues with additional drills, marching, weapon handling, formation practice. Instruction follows instruction. You discover muscles you did not realize existed. Several of those muscles appear unhappy. Around you, others share similar discoveries. Military improvement occasionally feels suspiciously like exercise. A curious observation found in some historical accounts is that soldiers often developed a mixture of admiration and complaint regarding intensive training. They appreciated becoming more effective while simultaneously wishing the process required slightly less effort. This reaction remains familiar in almost every learning environment ever created. Growth is rewarding. Growth is also work. The winter sun hangs low above the horizon. Its pale light spreads across snow-covered ground. Despite the cold, the training areas remain busy. The army's investing in itself. Every corrected movement, every practiced command, every repeated drill. Together they represent preparation for future challenges. You begin sensing subtle changes in morale, not universal changes, not immediate transformations, but noticeable shifts. People talk differently. They carry themselves differently. There is increasing confidence that improvement is possible. That confidence proves valuable. Valley Forge has already demanded endurance. Now it offers development. The two experiences feel very different. One focuses on surviving conditions. The other focuses on shaping the future. Several historians continue examining exactly how much the training introduced at Valley Forge contributed to later military successes. While specialists may debate specific measurements and outcomes, there is broad agreement that the encampment became an important period of professional development for the Continental Army. The significance extends beyond individual drills. It involves identity. What kind of army is emerging from this winter? The question grows more relevant each day. As evening approaches, the training finally concludes. Soldiers disperse toward huts and fires. The familiar camp atmosphere returns. Smoke rises into the darkening sky. Doors open and close. Meals are prepared. The rhythm of winter life resumes. You return to your hut feeling tired in a new way. Not from hauling wood, not from building shelters, from learning. Learning can be exhausting, especially when accompanied by cold weather and military expectations. Inside, the fire burns warmly. Several companions immediately begin discussing the day's training. Opinions vary. Some praise it enthusiastically, some complain enthusiastically. The level of enthusiasm remains consistent. Only the direction changes. Laughter spreads through the room. Stories of mistakes quickly become entertainment. One soldier reenacts a particularly confusing moment from earlier in the day. The performance receives widespread approval. Embarrassment transforms into comedy, a useful survival skill. The fire crackles softly. Outside, winter remains firmly established across the Pennsylvania landscape. Inside, something has changed. Not the weather, not the shortages, not the hardships. The people, a little more organized, a little more experienced, a little more prepared. Tomorrow will bring more drills, more corrections, more repetition. Yet beneath the routine, an important process is underway. An army that entered Valley Forge struggling through winter is slowly becoming an army preparing for victory. And the transformation is happening one practiced movement at a time. When daylight fades at Valley Forge, the camp changes character. The drills end. The work slows. The roads become quieter. Smoke thickens above the rows of huts as hundreds of fires brighten against the gathering darkness. For a few precious hours, survival gives way to storytelling. You return from the training grounds with tired legs and aching shoulders. The winter air feels sharp against your face. Snow remains scattered across the landscape, reflecting the last traces of afternoon sunlight. Around you, soldiers drift back towards shelter. The transformation happens gradually. The camp that spent all day chopping, hauling, repairing, drilling, and organizing begins settling into evening. You can almost feel the collective exhale. Inside the hut, the familiar warmth of the fire greets you. Someone has already added fresh logs. Orange light flickers across the walls. The smell of wood smoke fills the room. Several companions sit near the hearth, grateful to be indoors. The atmosphere feels noticeably different from daytime, less urgent, more reflective. One important aspect of military encampment life throughout history is the role of informal social gatherings. Even under difficult conditions, people consistently create opportunities to share stories, jokes, news, and companionship. Valley Forge is no exception. In fact, such moments may be more valuable here than almost anywhere else. You settle near the fire and listen. At first, conversation remains practical. Food, weather, training, the usual subjects. Gradually, however, the discussion drifts elsewhere. Someone begins talking about home, not in a sad way, more in the manner of a traveller describing a distant place. The story unfolds slowly. A family farm, a creek running behind a barn, a favourite horse, a stubborn neighbour. Details accumulate. Others contribute their own memories. Before long, the hut contains pieces of Massachusetts, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and several other places simultaneously. The fire remains in Pennsylvania. The conversation travels everywhere. You notice how carefully people listen. Stories matter here. They provide entertainment, they provide connection, sometimes they provide escape. A delightful detail found in several personal accounts is that soldiers occasionally developed reputations as particularly gifted storytellers. Certain individuals became popular simply because they could tell a good tale during a long winter evening. This talent remains highly respected in many places today, especially when alternatives include staring at a wall. The fire crackles softly. Outside, darkness spreads across the valley. Inside, imagination becomes transportation. One man describes fishing along a river during summer. Another remembers a local celebration. Someone recalls a meal so impressive that listeners immediately accuse him of exaggeration. The accusation seems justified. The meal grows larger and more delicious each time it is mentioned. Historical accuracy suffers greatly in the presence of nostalgia. The stories are not always serious. Far from it. Humour thrives inside the hut. People imitate officers, reenact mistakes from training drills, describe embarrassing moments from earlier campaigns. Laughter arrives frequently, not because life is easy, because laughter helps make difficult life easier. You contribute a story of your own, or perhaps several. Time passes almost unnoticed. The winter wind brushes against the walls. The fire glows warmly. The contrast between inside and outside feels dramatic. Within the hut, there is warmth, companionship, and conversation. Beyond the walls lies a frozen landscape stretching into darkness. One especially interesting tradition involved the sharing of rumours and news. Information travelled through camp in unpredictable ways. A letter arriving from another colony, a report from travellers, or even a passing comment could spark lengthy discussions. Not every rumour proved accurate. This fact rarely prevented its circulation. You hear several examples tonight. One concerns military developments elsewhere. Another involves political matters. A third seems increasingly questionable the longer it is examined. Nevertheless, everyone enjoys discussing it. The process feels strangely modern. Technology changes. Human curiosity does not. As evening deepens, some conversations become more thoughtful. The war enters the discussion. So does the future. People wonder what spring will bring, what battles might come, how long the conflict may continue. The questions have no easy answers. Still, discussing them provides a sense of control. Uncertainty feels smaller when shared. You glance around the room. Faces glow in firelight. Shadows move across rough wooden walls. Blankets rest across shoulders. Boots dry near the hearth. The scene appears humble. Yet there is richness here. Not material richness. Social richness. Community. Shared experience. Shared memory. Several scholars continue examining personal letters and diaries from Valley Forge because these documents reveal dimensions of camp life rarely captured in official military reports. Emotional experiences, friendships, humour, and daily interactions often emerge most clearly through personal recollections. Statistics can tell you how many people occupied the camp. Stories tell you how they lived. The fire burns lower. Someone adds another log. Sparks rise briefly before disappearing. The room grows quieter, not silent, just calmer. Fatigue eventually catches everyone. The day's labour demands payment. Eyes grow heavy. Voices soften. One final story drifts through the room. A funny one. Not particularly sophisticated. Not particularly important. Yet it produces genuine laughter. Perhaps that is enough. Outside, the stars shine above Valley Forge. The winter remains cold. The shortages remain real. The challenges remain unresolved. Nothing has changed in those respects. Yet tonight, surrounded by companions and stories, the hardship seems slightly easier to carry. The human mind has always possessed this remarkable ability. Gather people around a fire, give them stories, give them laughter, give them shared memories, and for a little while, even the hardest winter becomes more bearable. You lean back against the wall and watch the embers glow. Around you, conversations fade towards sleep. The camp settles into another winter night, and somewhere beyond the snow, beyond the forests, beyond the uncertainty of war, tomorrow quietly waits. The world beyond Valley Forge has not disappeared. It can feel that way sometimes. Weeks pass within the routines of camp life. The same hills surround you. The same forests stretch toward the horizon. The same rows of huts fill the valley with smoke and activity. Yet beyond those hills, ordinary civilians continue living their lives. Farmers tend fields. Merchants conduct business. Families gather around hearths. Children grow older. The war touches all of them in different ways. Today, you find yourself thinking more about those connections. The camp does not exist in isolation. It depends heavily upon the surrounding communities. You leave your hut shortly after sunrise and accompany a small group assigned to duties involving nearby settlements. The air feels slightly less severe than it did several weeks ago, though winter remains firmly in command. Snow lingers in shaded areas. Frozen patches cover parts of the road. The countryside appears quiet, almost sleepy. Yet signs of life emerge wherever people have settled. Smoke rises from distant chimneys. Livestock move across fields. Wagons travel narrow roads. The region surrounding Valley Forge remains active despite the season. A frequently acknowledged historical reality is that the Continental Army relied heavily upon relationships with nearby civilians for supplies, services, information, and various forms of support throughout the encampment. The relationship is complicated. Support does not always come easily. Resources are limited. Needs are great. Expectations sometimes collide with reality. You pass a farm where several workers are tending animals. The scene feels strangely peaceful after months inside a military encampment. No drill formations, no military orders, just ordinary winter work. Then again, ordinary work can be remarkably demanding. The farmer waves politely as your group passes. You wave back. The interaction lasts only seconds. Yet it serves as a reminder. Life continues beyond the army. You eventually reach a small community where people move about their daily routines. The atmosphere differs noticeably from camp life. There is less urgency, less structure, less concentration of people. Yet conversations inevitably return to the war. The conflict influences everyone. Some residents have family members serving in the army. Others provide supplies. Others worry about future military activity. Nobody remains completely untouched. One intriguing historical detail concerns the wide variety of civilian reactions to soldiers. Some communities welcomed military presence. Others viewed it with caution or frustration. Experiences varied depending on circumstances, personalities, and local conditions. Human relationships rarely fit into neat categories. The same was true during the Revolution. You spend part of the morning helping coordinate supply matters. The process involves discussions, records, and practical arrangements. Nothing glamorous. Yet these mundane interactions help sustain the army. A wagon loaded with provisions may influence events more than a dramatic speech. History often depends upon logistics disguised as routine errands. The people you meet appear curious about conditions within Valley Forge. Questions come quickly. How are the soldiers doing? Are supplies improving? How severe has the winter been? What changes are taking place? You answer as best you can. The camp has endured much. It has also grown stronger. Both statements are true. As midday approaches, you share a meal with several local residents. The setting feels different from anything inside the encampment. The conversation flows comfortably. News travels. Stories are exchanged. Observations are compared. For a short while, the distance between military and civilian life feels smaller. Communities are built through such moments, not merely through official agreements, through human interaction. A particularly charming anecdote from the era involves soldiers occasionally becoming minor local celebrities in nearby areas due to unusual backgrounds, entertaining personalities, or memorable stories. Small communities often remember distinctive visitors. The phenomenon seems entirely understandable. People enjoy interesting characters. Every century produces them. The afternoon sky remains overcast. A cold breeze moves through the countryside. You continue visiting nearby locations and gradually gain a deeper appreciation for the interconnected nature of the war effort. The army requires food. Farmers produce food. The army requires transportation. Civilian labour supports transportation. The army requires information. Local knowledge provides information. Nothing operates independently. Every success relies upon networks of cooperation. Every failure spreads consequences outward. Several modern scholars continue examining the exact nature of relationships between Valley Forge and surrounding communities. Experiences differed significantly from place to place, making broad conclusions difficult. Researchers continue exploring how local populations influence the encampment and how the encampment influenced local populations in return. The influence clearly travelled both directions. By late afternoon, your group begins returning toward camp. The familiar hills of Valley Forge gradually reappear. Smoke rises into the winter sky. Rows of huts become visible once more. The settlement feels almost like a city after spending time in quieter surroundings. You realize how much the camp has grown, not physically, emotionally, socially, organizationally. The Valley Forge of today differs from the Valley Forge you first encountered. The changes are subtle, yet unmistakable. As evening approaches, activity slows. People return to shelter. Fires brighten. The familiar scent of wood smoke fills the air. Inside your hut, companions gather round the hearth. Someone asks about conditions beyond camp. Questions follow. What did you see? Who did you meet? How are local communities managing the winter? The discussion continues for quite some time. News from outside remains valuable. It reminds everyone that the world extends beyond the valley. The fire crackles softly. The room glows with warm light. Outside, darkness settles across the Pennsylvania countryside. Farmers return to their homes. Merchants conclude their business. Families gather around their own hearths. Meanwhile, Valley Forge prepares for another winter night. Different lives, different routines, yet all connected by the same conflict shaping the future. You sit quietly and think about those connections. The roads linking settlements to camp, the wagons carrying supplies, the conversations bridging different worlds. History often focuses on armies and leaders, yet entire communities help carry events forward. And tonight, as the wind moves gently beyond the hut walls, you understand that Valley Forge has never stood alone. The hardest part of winter is not always the beginning. The beginning carries momentum. People are busy building huts, establishing routines, solving immediate problems. There is a sense of action. The hardest part often arrives later, when the novelty has vanished, when the cold feels endless, when every difficult day begins to resemble the one before it. That is where you find yourself now, the deep heart of winter. The season has stretched across weeks. Valley Forge remains standing. The army remains intact, yet the strain is visible. You wake before dawn and immediately recognize the familiar sensation. Cold, not dramatic cold, not surprising cold, expected cold. The kind that greets you every morning without fail. The kind that settles into routines alongside everyone else. Outside, the camp appears muted beneath grey skies. Snow lingers in patches, ice glitters along pathways. Smoke rises from chimneys into still air. Everything feels subdued. Even the sounds seem quieter. The season is demanding patience now. A thoroughly documented aspect of the Valley Forge encampment is that prolonged hardship tested morale repeatedly throughout the winter. Endurance became a daily requirement rather than an occasional challenge. You step outside and notice tired faces. Not defeated faces. Tired ones. There is a difference. People continue working, continue training, continue maintaining the camp. But winter has accumulated weight. Weeks of cold weather leave marks. You join a work crew assigned to routine duties. The task itself is not difficult. The challenge lies in repetition. Many jobs have already been performed dozens of times. The same roads, the same wood piles, the same repairs, the same responsibilities. Monotony can become its own kind of burden. Human beings often endure short hardships better than long ones. The mind likes visible finish lines. Winter refuses to provide one, at least not yet. As morning progresses, clouds gather overhead. A light snowfall begins. No one seems particularly impressed. The camp has developed a professional relationship with snow. You acknowledge its presence, then continue working. The reaction would have seemed remarkable several months earlier. Now it feels normal. One lesser known but revealing detail from personal accounts involves soldiers creating small personal rituals to maintain a sense of stability. Certain people followed the same routines every morning or evening, finding comfort in predictability during uncertain times. The behavior makes perfect sense. Routine can become an anchor, especially when circumstances remain difficult. You carry supplies between different sections of camp and observe subtle signs of fatigue everywhere. People move a little slower. Conversations occasionally sound more subdued. The winter has become familiar. Unfortunately, familiar challenges remain challenges. The camp continues functioning because thousands of individuals keep choosing effort over resignation. That choice deserves recognition. By midday, the snowfall thickens. The landscape grows quieter beneath the falling white blanket. Rows of huts appear softer. The surrounding hills fade into the distance. Valley Forge looks peaceful, almost serene. Appearances can be deceptive. Beneath that calm exterior, people continue wrestling with shortages, illness, uncertainty, and exhaustion. History often hides labour beneath beautiful scenery. You pause beside a fire and warm your hands. Several soldiers nearby discuss how long winter seems to last. Everyone has an opinion. Some insist spring is close. Others remain unconvinced. The debate has become a seasonal tradition. Evidence appears optional. Hope does most of the work. A particularly human anecdote from the encampment involves people carefully searching for signs that winter might be weakening. A warmer afternoon, a patch of melting snow, or the return of certain birds could inspire lengthy discussions about whether spring was finally approaching. Optimism frequently begins with small observations. The afternoon drifts onward. Training continues despite the weather. Work details continue. Camp life continues. The army has reached a stage where persistence matters more than enthusiasm. That may sound less inspiring. In many ways, it is more impressive. Enthusiasm comes and goes. Persistence remains. You notice how experience has changed the camp. Months earlier, certain problems would have caused confusion. Now people respond efficiently. Repairs happen quickly. Tasks are organised smoothly. Challenges are addressed with practical confidence. Hardship has become a teacher. Not a pleasant teacher. An effective one. Some historians continue exploring which weeks represented the lowest point of morale during the encampment. Personal experiences varied considerably, making precise conclusions difficult. Different groups faced different circumstances, and emotional resilience often depended upon factors that are difficult to measure centuries later. What remains clear is that there were difficult periods, very difficult periods, yet the army endured them. That endurance deserves attention. As daylight begins fading, the snowfall finally slows. The camp emerges beneath fresh white layers. Smoke rises into the cold evening air. The familiar transition toward nighttime begins. You return to your hut feeling tired, not unusually tired, winter tired, the cumulative kind. Inside, the fire burns steadily. Companions gather around the hearth. The atmosphere feels quieter than usual. Nobody seems unhappy, just reflective. The season encourages reflection. Conversations drift toward the future. Spring, campaigns, home, possibilities. People need something beyond winter to think about. The human mind naturally looks ahead. The fire crackles softly. Orange light flickers across rough wooden walls. Outside, darkness settles across the valley. Inside, warmth and companionship hold the cold at bay for another evening. You look around the room. The same faces, the same hut, the same fire. Months ago, all of it felt unfamiliar. Now it feels like a community, a weary community, the resilient community, a community that has weathered one challenge after another. The hardest weeks may not yet be fully behind you, yet something important has changed. The camp has proven it can endure, not perfectly, not comfortably, but successfully. And sometimes success is simply the decision to rise tomorrow morning and continue. The winter still stretches ahead. The snow still covers the ground. The wind still moves through the trees. Yet tonight, beneath the familiar glow of the hearth, you sense that Valley Forge has already passed an important test. The camp remains standing, and so do the people within it. One morning, something feels different. Not dramatically different. Not enough to make anyone throw away their winter coat. Nothing so reckless. The change is subtle. A faint softness in the air. A slightly different quality of light. A sense that winter may finally be loosening its grip. You step outside before sunrise and pause instinctively. For several seconds, you cannot identify what feels unusual. Then you realize the cold remains present. It simply feels less absolute. The difference is small, yet after months of winter, small differences become significant. The camp seems to notice as well. People move through their routines as always. Fires are lit, wood is gathered, training continues, yet conversations increasingly include one word: spring. You hear it everywhere. Spring in the supply area, spring near the training grounds, spring around campfires, spring inside huts. The season has become a shared destination. A firmly established historical reality is that the Valley Forge encampment lasted from December 1777 until June 1778, meaning the army eventually witnessed the gradual transition from winter conditions toward warmer weather. That transition begins quietly. Nature rarely rushes. You walk along one of the main paths and notice patches of snow shrinking around exposed areas. The change is modest, almost hesitant, yet it is visible. A few weeks earlier, such patches would have seemed impossible. Now they appear naturally. Winter has not ended. Winter has begun negotiating. The morning sun rises through scattered clouds. Its warmth remains limited. Its presence feels encouraging. Soldiers linger outdoors a little longer when sunlight appears. Faces turn toward the light. The reaction seems instinctive. After months of grey skies and cold winds, brightness becomes valuable. You join a training exercise later in the morning. The drills continue. The standards remain demanding. Yet something has changed in the mood. The work feels connected to a future that is approaching rather than a future that seems distant. Spring makes plans feel real. Campaigns feel closer. Movement feels possible. The army is no longer merely enduring winter. It is preparing to emerge from it. One fascinating little detail from various military camps throughout history is how quickly people become amateur weather experts whenever seasonal change approaches. Observations about clouds, birds, wind patterns, and temperature suddenly receive intense attention. Valley Forge proves no exception. You hear confident weather predictions throughout the day. Their accuracy varies considerably. Confidence does not. A soldier points toward the sky and declares that warm weather is imminent. Another points toward the same sky and predicts additional snow. Both sound equally certain. The clouds remain diplomatically neutral. By midday, the camp feels more energetic than it did during the darkest weeks of winter, not because conditions have become easy, because improvement seems possible. Hope gains strength when supported by evidence. Melting snow counts as evidence. You spend part of the afternoon helping transport supplies. The roads remain difficult. Mud begins appearing in places where ice once dominated. This development receives mixed reviews. Frozen ground is uncomfortable. Mud is creative. Mud finds new ways to cause problems. Valley Forge continues offering challenges regardless of season. Still, most people appear willing to accept mud as a sign of progress. The alternative is more winter. A particularly charming observation from personal writings involves the excitement generated by the return of birds. Certain species became unofficial messengers of seasonal change. Their appearance often prompted conversation far out of proportion to their size. After months of snow and silence, even a small bird can seem important. You notice similar reactions throughout camp. People are watching the natural world carefully. The angle of sunlight, the condition of roads, the behavior of animals, the length of daylight. Every detail becomes part of a larger story. The story of winter ending. As afternoon drifts toward evening, you climb a small rise overlooking the encampment. The view is striking. Rows of huts stretch across the landscape. Smoke rises into the sky. Training grounds remain active. People move along winding paths. The camp appears stronger than it did months ago. Not stronger physically in every case. Stronger organizationally. Stronger emotionally. Stronger collectively. You remember the uncertainty of your arrival. The unfinished shelters. The shortages. The confusion. The fear of what winter might bring. Many of those challenges proved real, yet the camp endured. That fact feels increasingly important. Several historians continue discussing exactly when morale began improving noticeably during the encampment. Human emotions do not change on a single date, making precise answers difficult. Different groups experienced the transition differently, and optimism often arrived gradually rather than suddenly. That gradual process feels visible now, like sunlight spreading across a landscape. Slow, steady, unmistakable. The afternoon fades into evening. The sky turns shades of gold and pale pink. Snow reflects the changing colours beautifully. For a few moments, Valley Forge looks almost peaceful enough to forget its hardships. Almost. Then you remember the months behind you. The cold mornings, the illnesses, the shortages, the endless labour. Beauty does not erase difficulty. It simply exists beside it. You return to your hut as darkness approaches. Inside, the atmosphere feels lively. Conversations revolve around future possibilities, training, campaigns, travel, home. The future has become a topic again. For a long time, winter dominated every discussion. Now the horizon seems wider. The fire crackles warmly. Faces glow in the orange light. Outside, the night settles across the valley. Yet even the darkness feels different. Daylight lasts a little longer now. The change is slight, enough to notice, enough to matter. You sit quietly and watch the flames. Tomorrow may bring snow, tomorrow may bring rain, tomorrow may bring mud. Spring does not arrive all at once, it arrives piece by piece. But tonight, after months of endurance, Valley Forge can finally see signs that the season is changing. And with that change comes something precious, not certainty, not comfort, possibility. For people who have carried winter this far, possibility feels like a gift. The signs are everywhere now. Not dramatic signs. Not blooming fields or warm summer breezes. Those remain some distance away. But the evidence is impossible to ignore. The snow retreats. The daylight stretches longer into the evening. The roads soften beneath wagon wheels. And perhaps most importantly, the camp begins thinking less about surviving winter and more about leaving it behind. You wake before dawn and immediately notice the difference. The sky brightens earlier. Birdsong occasionally interrupts the familiar sounds of camp life. The air remains cool, but the sharp edge of deep winter has softened. The change feels gradual when experienced day by day. Looking back, however, it seems remarkable. You step outside and watch smoke rise from hundreds of chimneys. The valley looks familiar, yet not quite the same. Valley Forge has spent months shaping the people living within it. Now those people are preparing for the next stage of the journey. A broadly accepted historical fact is that by the spring of 1778, the Continental Army emerging from Valley Forge was significantly more organised and disciplined than the force that had entered the encampment months earlier. The transformation did not happen overnight. It happened one day at a time. One drill, one repair, one hardship, one lesson. Accumulated effort eventually becomes visible. You join a group assigned to help prepare equipment and supplies. The atmosphere feels purposeful, not rushed, focused. People understand that change is approaching. The camp cannot remain here forever. The war continues beyond these hills. The army must be ready. As you work, you notice how different conversations have become. Earlier in winter, discussions often centered on immediate concerns: food, firewood, shelter, cold weather. Now, future plans dominate. Where will the army go next? What campaigns lie ahead? What challenges await? The horizon feels wider. Hope often expands perspective. One charming little detail from military history involves soldiers beginning to speculate endlessly about future movements whenever departure seems possible. Predictions multiply rapidly. Confidence flourishes. Accuracy becomes optional. Valley Forge follows the tradition faithfully. You hear several competing forecasts before breakfast. All are presented with great certainty. All cannot possibly be correct. The morning unfolds beneath a pale blue sky. Clouds drift slowly overhead. Training continues across parts of the camp. The drills now look noticeably smoother than they once did. Movements appear more coordinated. Commands produce quicker responses. The improvements are difficult to miss. You pause briefly to watch. Months ago, confusion often accompanied new instructions. Now routines feel familiar. Practice has done its work. The transformation reminds you of something simple. Progress often feels invisible while it is happening. Only later do people realize how far they have come. By midday, wagons move steadily through camp, supplies are checked, equipment is inspected, preparations continue. The atmosphere resembles a household getting ready for a long journey, because that is essentially what is happening. Valley Forge has been home, temporary home, difficult home, but home nonetheless. Soon it will be left behind. You find yourself reflecting on the early weeks, the unfinished huts, the endless construction, the shortages, the uncertainty. At the time, no one knew exactly how the winter would unfold. Now the outcome feels visible all around you. The camp survived. The army survived. Not without hardship, not without sacrifice, but it survived. A particularly interesting observation found in personal writings is that some soldiers express surprisingly mixed feelings about leaving. Despite all the discomforts, months spent together had created familiarity and attachment. Human beings often develop emotional connections to places they once disliked. The phenomenon feels deeply relatable. Shared experiences leave marks. The afternoon passes in steady activity. The weather remains pleasant by winter standards. Mud appears in areas once covered by snow. The development creates practical challenges. It also serves as evidence that seasons continue moving forward. Nature follows its own schedule. The camp adjusts accordingly. You spend time helping organize supplies and equipment. The task provides an excellent opportunity to observe the army. The differences are striking. People seem more confident, more experienced, more accustomed to working together. Hardship has shaped them. Training has shaped them. Time has shaped them. Many historians continue discussing the precise legacy of Valley Forge. Some emphasize military improvements. Others highlight leadership, morale, logistics, or symbolism. The discussion remains active because the encampment influenced so many different aspects of the Revolutionary War experience. Its significance extends beyond a single lesson. Valley Forge became a process, a season of transformation. As evening approaches, golden sunlight spreads across the valley. The scene feels unusually beautiful. Rows of huts glow warmly. Smoke rises into calm air. The surrounding hills appear softer beneath the fading light. You climb a small rise and look across the encampment. For a moment, everything seems still. Then you notice movement everywhere. People working, training, preparing, living. The camp remains active until the very end. You stand quietly and watch. The view feels meaningful, not because the place is perfect, because you know its story. You know the cold mornings, the hungry days, the long nights, the determination required to endure them. Inside the hut that evening, conversation flows easily. The mood feels lighter than it has in months. People speak about the future, the roads ahead, the possibility of victory, the possibility of home. The fire crackles softly. Outside, stars begin appearing overhead. The familiar winter camp prepares for another night. Yet this night feels different. The end of the encampment is approaching. The next chapter waits just beyond the horizon, and after everything Valley Forge has demanded, the people gathered around these fires seem ready to meet it. The morning arrives with a softness that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of winter. You step outside your hut and pause. The air still carries a chill, but it is no longer the relentless cold that once greeted every sunrise. Birds move among the trees. Small patches of green have begun appearing across parts of the landscape. The sky seems larger somehow, brighter, more open, after months of smoke, snow, frost, mud, hunger, labour, illness, training, and endurance. Valley Forge is preparing to say goodbye. You stand quietly and look across the encampment. The rows of huts remain. The roads remain. The memories certainly remain. Yet the camp feels different. It feels temporary again. Not because it is unfinished, because it is nearly finished with its purpose. A foundational historical fact is that the Continental Army departed Valley Forge in June 1778, leaving behind the winter encampment that had shaped one of the most significant chapters of the American Revolution. The departure does not happen all at once. Large armies rarely do anything all at once. Preparations unfold steadily. Supplies are organized. Equipment is inspected. Orders circulate. People discuss routes and destinations. The atmosphere combines excitement and reflection. You spend the morning helping prepare materials for the coming march. Around you, others do the same. The activity feels purposeful. Forward-looking, winter concerns no longer dominate every conversation. The future has returned. Yet as you move through camp, you find yourself noticing familiar places. The path where you carried firewood. The hut where stories filled long evenings. The training grounds where drills transform confusion into confidence. The hospital where so many struggled toward recovery. The ridges overlooking the valley. Places gain meaning through experience. Valley Forge has accumulated meaning in abundance. One delightful little historical curiosity is that visitors in later generations sometimes searched for physical traces of the encampment, fascinated by the idea that an ordinary landscape once hosted extraordinary events. The land itself became part of the story. You understand the impulse. The hills look peaceful now, almost ordinary. Yet you know what happened here. The memory changes the view. As midday approaches, the camp remains busy. Training continues. Work details continue. The army has not abandoned discipline simply because departure approaches. If anything, the improvements achieved during winter now appear more visible than ever. Formations move with greater confidence. Tasks are performed more efficiently. People seem more accustomed to working together. The transformation is difficult to ignore. You think back to your arrival, the uncertainty, the shortages, the unfinished shelters, the sense of vulnerability. Those memories feel distant now, not forgotten, transformed. The winter didn't merely test the army, it reshaped it. Some historians continue examining which aspects of the Valley Forge experience proved most influential in the long term. Different interpretations emphasize leadership, training, logistics, morale, or symbolism. The discussion remains active because the encampment changed the army in multiple ways simultaneously. Perhaps that complexity is the real lesson. Important historical moments rarely produce only one result. They ripple outward, creating effects visible for years. The afternoon sunlight spreads warmly across the valley. For the first time in months, warmth feels like a realistic description rather than an optimistic exaggeration. People notice, they linger outdoors, they smile more easily. Winter's grip has finally weakened. Nature itself seems to acknowledge the transition. You walk toward a rise overlooking the camp and pause once more. Below you stretches the community that survived one of the most challenging seasons of the war. Thousands arrived. Thousands endured. Not everyone lived to see spring. That reality deserves remembrance. Yet the broader story remains one of persistence. Persistence in the face of cold. Persistence in the face of hunger. Persistence in the face of uncertainty. Human history contains many famous battles. Valley Forge reminds you that endurance can be equally important. A fascinating observation sometimes made by researchers is that the symbolic importance of Valley Forge grew steadily after the Revolution. The encampment became more than a historical event. It became a story people used to represent sacrifice, resilience, and commitment. Symbols evolve over time. The actual winter was complicated, messy, human. The symbol became simpler. Reality remains more interesting. As evening approaches, the valley glows beneath the golden light of the setting sun. Smoke rises from familiar chimneys. Voices drift through the air. The camp prepares for another night, one of its last. You return to the hut. The fire burns softly. The atmosphere feels reflective. Companions speak about future campaigns, future journeys, future possibilities. No one knows exactly what lies ahead. The war continues, challenges remain, yet confidence feels stronger than it did months ago. You sit quietly and watch the flames. The room feels familiar, comfortably familiar. Outside, twilight settles across the Pennsylvania countryside. The same hills surround the camp. The same forests stand watch. The same stars begin appearing overhead. Yet everything has changed. Not the landscape, the people. And so, as the last light fades from the valley, the story of Valley Forge begins settling into memory. The huts, the fires, the snow, the training grounds, the friendships, the hardships, the hope, all of it becoming part of something larger, something that future generations will remember. And now, as the camp grows quiet beneath the evening sky, it is time to let the sounds of Valley Forge drift gently away. The wind moves softly through the trees. The fires burn lower. The voices become quieter. The roads rest beneath the fading light. You no longer need to march. You no longer need to gather wood. You no longer need to watch the weather or count the remaining days of winter. Instead, you can simply sit beside the last glowing embers and look across the peaceful valley. The hills are calm now. The forests are calm. The sky above stretches endlessly, painted with stars. The hardships of winter belong to the past. The future belongs to morning. For now, there is only stillness, only warmth, only quiet reflection. And as the last traces of firelight fade into darkness, Valley Forge settles gently into history. Sweet dreams.